Meet a handsome blonde named Kevin. He is a daring and brazen mercenary with a nasty scar on his face. And this is right, a dark-haired middle-aged man, a famous carpenter. Next to him stands a plump and shy village boy, Howard. He has a small stall in Halcyon. It's hard not to notice the red-haired beauty Joan. The girl is quite mysterious but looks sweet and good-natured. A stern and heavy look, black hair. This charismatic guy is an ordinary farmer, Peter. There were 10 of them in total. They found themselves in a strange, frightening place. None of them yet knew what they would have to endure. The guys try to figure out why they are here, they argue, but the only thing they find out is that they are all from Tanya. Suddenly, a striking creature appears and warns our heroes to be ready for battle, as the master has opened a rift in space and time. Everyone looks in surprise at the small, glowing and flying creature. The magical entity meets the heroes, and it turns out that this guardian fairy is Izzy, who immediately declares her severity. Kevin approaches and brazenly tells the fairy that it is her fault that she brought them to this place. Izzy tries to get rid of him, saying that it is none of his business. The mercenary quickly gets angry at this attitude, and he grabs his sword to punish the impudent keeper, thinking that he can force an answer out of her. The fairy takes a deep breath and warns him not to bother her, otherwise she will take his life. Of course, such rudeness infuriated Kevin, and he decided to put an end to this little brat once and for all. Izzy's cheeky smile indicated that this was not the first time she had encountered something like this, and that she clearly already knew the outcome of events. At that very moment, Kevin loses his head, and it flies far away due to the powerful blow of the fairy. Blood covers the entire floor. His eyes roll back. It became clear that the rough mercenary is dead. The faces of everyone else froze in horror at the picture they saw. The heroes were shocked and frightened. No one expected this from the little fairy. Izzy's sweet face turned into a terrifying one, her eyes saying that this would happen to anyone who tried to raise a hand to her. The frightened heroes began to ask why she had acted so cruelly and what she wanted from them. But she only repeated that they needed to fight and win. Suddenly, an announcement appeared that the group was formed and the master decided to start. Izzy warned everyone about their readiness. With one wave, the little guardian fairy opened a huge rift into the unknown. It shone with a bright blue light and was blinding. The names of those who are to enter the rift are announced. Everyone looks into it with fear, but no one dares to move. Izzy kindly invites the heroes to enter the rift, gently hinting to them that if they do not, they will repeat the fate of the mercenary. However, she is interrupted by Peter, which greatly irritates her. He manipulates Izzy by telling her that she wants to get to the top of the tower, and that in order to do that, she needs to ask the master to choose a weapon for the heroes, since they are all 1-stars and the only 2-star just died. Otherwise, they will go to their certain death. Joan looks at them from the side and does not understand at all what Peter is talking about and why he knows all this. The fairy looks at the mercenary's corpse, realizing that she has deprived the group of a strong hero, and agrees to the farmer's proposal. At this moment, a computer hologram appears in front of her, in which she addresses the master with a request to give the heroes equipment and weapons to increase their chances of victory, to which the master responds positively and supplies them with a starter kit. Wright asks Peter if he knows anything about this place, but he says that he hasn't been here for a long time and is not well informed. Joan has more and more questions for the seemingly ordinary farmer. Black-haired Peter points the heroes to the armory and commands them to take their weapons, announcing the imminent start. The other heroes begin to wonder and ask him what he is talking about, but Peter calmly says that a battle is coming. Naturally, everyone is excited and hesitantly takes up arms. Because no one has prepared them for this, they will fight for the first time. The heroes do not know what to expect next beyond the rift. Returning from the armory, the boys notice that Kevin's body had mysteriously disappeared, and only blood remained on the pavement. But the strict guardian fairy told them not to pay attention to it, and the first 5 moved forward. Old Man Wright and the 4 other heroes headed towards the bright light. They carefully and cautiously walked into the cut. Joan watched Peter closely. She was deciding whether she should team up with him, because for some unknown reason he knew more than anyone else about this place, about the fact that they needed weapons and equipment. Unable to contain herself, she bombarded him with questions about why he knew so much, who this fairy was, what was behind the gate. But he only coldly replied that they needed to kill enemies in the arena, and everything else was out of their hands. At some point, announcements of hero deaths began to appear, which greatly disappointed Peter and worried Joan. Peter didn't expect anything else from the 1-stars, and Joan still didn't understand what was going on. But he answered her questions so that she would keep quiet. When all of the group were killed, the farmer was alarmed by the fact that it happened suspiciously quickly, and the fairy, who was nearby, shuddered in bewilderment, because the heroes lost only on the first floor, which was unheard of. Already angry, Izzy turned to the remaining heroes and shouted to go into the rift, since it was their turn. A cunning old man approached her and complained about his arthritis, saying that he couldn't even walk, with a clear hint at his exclusion from the group. But the fairy only said that they were idiots, because recently the grandfather had been walking normally and hadn't caused any problems. Peter moved forward, ready to fight, and the others followed him with fear in their eyes. Grandfather had to be dragged by the scruff of the neck. He tried to come up with reasons not to go there right up until the gates, but they dragged him in by force no matter how hard he tried. They entered a huge hall, reminiscent of a temple. It was dark, and only the light from the huge gates illuminated their path. In front of the heroes, inscriptions appeared, which said that they were now on the first floor in the main dungeon, and they would need to climb to the top and save the world. An announcement popped up about the opening of the gates. A brave farmer commanded to go forward, and they all, with caution, went into the unknown. The team found themselves in the middle of a field illuminated by a crimson sunset, where there was not a single soul except them. Everyone froze in anticipation of something terrible. A moment later, a task to destroy enemies appeared. A terrifying horde of nasty, green, red-eyed, blade-like teeth goblins, armed with simple weapons, appeared out of nowhere and began to actively attack the group. Peter warned the heroes to fight and pull themselves together. Otherwise, they would be killed by these vile creatures. But turning around, he saw how 3 men from the team began to run away from the monsters, saving their miserable lives. However, the daredevils who had fled the battlefield were stopped by a transparent wall that outlined the boundaries of the test. The guys flew into it with a crash. They were disconcerted by such an unexpected circumstance. With the pain of hitting the wall, they tried to scream loudly to be released. The grandfather, who had clearly forgotten about all his illnesses, began to furiously beat the invisible barrier and get indignant, demanding that he be released from here immediately. Peter and Joan, who had not fled when they first saw their enemies, looked at these unfortunate cowards with obvious disappointment. They immediately realized that they needed to act in a coordinated manner, without relying on the others. Peter said that he would go into close combat, and Joan would need to be prepared to shoot back at the goblins with a bow. At that very moment, a crowd of monsters pounced on them to tear them to shreds, and the battle began. At the moment of the heat of events, we are suddenly transported to the loading screen of a game called Choose Me. The rules and goal of the game are displayed on the phone screen. The goal is to reach the 100th floor of the tower. You must create items to improve and strengthen the heroes, and work out tactics to pass each stage. It turns out that all this time a young guy named Tim was playing the game. Sitting at home, he chose the hero Peter for himself to pass the floors. Unfortunately, he has bad luck. After opening thousands of cards, he was unable to get a 7-star hero, although everyone already has them. Choose Me differs from its peers by its rather strict rules. The heroes have only 1 life, regardless of the number of stars. It will be impossible to return them, so he should be careful. The black-haired guy opens the dungeon and is bombarded with warnings that all his heroes are experiencing fear, which reduces all stats by 30%. He doesn't understand at all what the heroes are so afraid of. One of them even wants to retreat and is in panic. Immediately, a level 9999 monster appears on the playing field and pierces all the heroes through and through. The game ends in defeat. The guy does not understand why this happened and what kind of strange bug this is. Suddenly, a terrible call comes from the phone, and the same monster from the game appears, saying that he found a guy who, in turn, is terribly scared and confused. He suddenly plunges into darkness and sees nothing. A notification about creating an account pops up in front of him. He is asked to choose the name Anything and is confirmed without his participation. The guy is incredibly scared because he does not understand where he is and why they confirm the choice of name for him. They welcome him into the game and offer to start training, after which he will be able to receive a reward. He is transported to a burning city in the body of the hero Peter, and his game begins with a narration and story about where and who he is. In an unremarkable town lived a guy named Peter. Tanya is the land where people live together with other races. An unknown enemy attacked these peaceful lands. Master, you need to climb to the top of the tower to save this world. Tim gets a training mission to destroy the goblins that have invaded the city. This shocks him. No one prepared him for this. The guy frantically hopes that this is not real. But he didn't have time to figure out what was happening, because a goblin with a sharp blade and burning eyes, wanting to kill him, had already attacked him. The hero repels the creature's powerful attack with a quick blow of his sword. The goblin's blade flies away, and Tim furiously cuts the enemy. The task was completed, But the young man could not come to terms with the fact that he had personally killed another creature, that he was inside the game. As he walked, the picture around him changed to a huge bright square, where he had already been when he played Pick Me on his phone. Notifications popped up for the master asking him to summon an allied hero before the next quest, after which the master agreed and received 500 crystals as a reward. The doors of the main building swung open, and the light pouring out of them illuminated the entire square and the hero himself. A beautiful night girl with golden hair, shining armor, and a long sword appeared in front of Tim. The guy looked at what was happening in surprise and tried to understand what kind of call this was, who she was. The girl looked at Tim with a cold gaze and decided to find out who this young man was. The hero introduced himself, and the knight told him her name, Helen, after which the master united them into a group, and they went into the dungeon. With merciless blows, Helen killed the goblins one after another, unlike Tim, who had never held a sword in his hands before and had no experience at all. Thanks to the girl, they won. Helen received a level up as a sign of good work, and Tim tried to catch his breath and collect his thoughts. These heroes were too different. But after that, the guy had a problem, because the last part of the training began, namely, synthesis, a way to strengthen heroes. Then he realized that he was finished. His sad thoughts were dispelled by a cheeky female voice, which demanded that he quickly go to synthesis. When the guy raised his head, he saw the guardian fairy, Izzy, whom he clearly did not expect to meet. She was surprised to learn that he knew her. Tim, in the body of the hero Peter, tells the fairy that he was a player and introduces himself. Izzy can't find Tim in the list of heroes, only Peter, which baffles her. The guardian nervously asks if he is from Earth, to which Tim answers yes, and the fairy begins to scream and rush about in panic because this simply cannot be. Then he suddenly turns to the guy and orders him to go into the synthesis, but he is afraid that he will simply be killed there. Izzy does not mess around with him for long and throws him into the synthesis room by force. Tim falls with a crash onto the cold floor, the synthesis begins, and the entire space is covered in blue fire. If we talk about synthesis in more detail, it is the strengthening of heroes by combining them. One of them is sacrificed to strengthen the other. The problem for the black-haired boy is that he only has 1 star, while the knight has 4. A sane player will never sacrifice Helen for him. When Tim was already prepared for his death, they announced that the synthesis was complete and chose a girl as a sacrifice, not him. Helen began to disappear in blue flames because the master decided to strengthen Tim. She only managed to wish him good luck. Now the young man was left alone in an empty cold hall, where the last particles of the once beautiful night girl were disappearing. Soon Tim, now Peter, went into battle with the team again. He was still tormented by the question of why the master had dumped such a cool character with 4 stars and left him. Maybe he was stupid, inexperienced, or did he have a plan? While the boy was thinking about this, a nimble goblin attacked him from behind and cut off his right hand. The hero immediately attacked the vile monster with a blow to the head, leaving no chance for life. He constantly thought about that level 999 demon who had forcibly brought him here. He hated him and was determined to take revenge. Sitting with a wounded arm after the battle, he thought about the mechanics of the game, that players do not actually control the fights directly, and all the battles are carried out by the combat artificial intelligence. But even so, the game has gained 1 million downloads. But there is only one reason for this: the opportunity to observe this world like God. Tim remembered how he was the same player, created items, upgraded heroes, built tactics. He decided for himself that he would not give up and would reach the top of the tower. This task was successfully completed and useful resources were obtained, and Joan was able to increase her level. Peter became the most valuable hero, his stern face emblazoned on the highlighted card. After the fight, Peter went to train. He had already come to terms with what was happening. Because whining is for losers, you can't give up. He talked about death in this game, that there are 2 types. On the battlefield and during synthesis, he knew that heroes with 1 star are useless and are often disposed of because they are just ballast. The guy ran, but all his thoughts were filled with the fact that he had weak characteristics, slow pumping, that he had to become stronger, otherwise he would be expended. He trained with a dummy, did strength training non-stop. He promised himself that he would strengthen his body and spirit, take revenge, and return home. His thoughts are interrupted by the voice of Joan, who has come to check on Peter and share her thoughts and experiences about this place. She shared with him her intention to become stronger and more resilient in order to survive, because she understood that tears would not help in any way, but would only make the situation worse. While the girl was speaking, she took the bow, pulled the bowstring, and fired straight into the head of the training dummy, which once again spoke of the firmness of her intentions. Peter began asking about her archery skills to see if she would be suitable for the Alliance. Analyzing the fact that she had weapon skills even though she was weaker than him, Joan had no problem killing goblins in her first battle. She quickly moved on from the death of other people and had a clear goal. He realized that she was a diamond in the rough. Having agreed to form a group and help each other, Peter extended his hand. Their firm handshake gave them a relationship bonus that will help them in the future. The hero decided to call Izzy by shouting her name loudly. The irritated fairy quickly appeared in front of him, stating that she was very busy. The keeper immediately warned that she was not going to answer stupid questions, and if he wanted to know something, he should go to the top of the tower because all the answers were there. Interrupting Izzy, Peter asks if he is the only one who can see the status windows, but she starts to protest that this cannot be. And it is this reaction that suggests that the guy is the only one who sees the system messages addressed to the master. With his second question, he decides to find out what will happen if the master quits the game, to which the fairy replies that he should pray that this does not happen. He was still worried about the synthesis situation, when for some reason the master had fused a 4-star hero for him, missing out on such a rare chance. The third question about the different flow of time in the game and in the real world made the fairy angry, but her reaction again spoke for itself, which meant that time was different. The enraged Izzy no longer knew what to do with herself, because she can only intervene in case of disobedience to the master or self-defense. Thus the hero could learn most of the rules of this world, which greatly infuriated the fairy. Excited, Joan asked to tell her what they had talked about, and Peter told her about some rules that would help her survive and reach the top. That she needed to train more to increase her capabilities. The black-haired man learned another interesting feature of this world. All essential items and food are renewed every day. You can also get other things, just think about it. And it will appear by the fireplace or in the closet. But this does not work with game items, weapons, or money. The training results are also different. Now he learns about mechanics that he didn't even know about when he played himself. For example, even among the heroes of the same star class, there are more talented ones. Their distinctive feature is hard work. Soon, the master will begin to sort heroes by 3 criteria, one of which is fortitude, because the master does not need heroes who are prone to panic on the battlefield. The second is, of course, skills. High-ranking heroes are summoned with skills, but 1-star ones require hard work to unlock them. The third point is physical training, which is what he focused on. 3 days later, the master logged into the game again, during which time Peter had only managed to acquire 2 skills. Suddenly, a call for new heroes began and 3 guys entered the world. A middle-aged man with a fearful look is Stanley. An aggressive guy of oriental appearance is Phil, and a young, tall, blonde guy is Charlie. Joan immediately ordered them to prepare for a battle where they would have to fight and survive, after which everything would be explained to them. The magnificent Izzy opened a rift in space and time with a slight wave of her hand. Peter and Joan began to quickly gather weapons from the armory, as there was little time before the battle began. The heroes who had just arrived began to bombard the fairy with questions in a panic. Joan tried to restrain them somehow, warning them that it was better not to bother the keeper. However, the attempts were futile and Peter and Joan went ahead, leaving the annoying newcomers with Izzy. As soon as they passed through the rift, 3 heroes flew in behind them and fell to the floor, whom Izzy had to forcefully push here. Before closing the rift, the fairy smiled tenderly and told them to have fun there. The blue circle that appeared below them transferred the group to the battlefield, to the 2nd floor, where the objective of the mission emerged: to destroy the enemies. At this moment, 3rd-level goblins and 4th-level steppe wolves appeared with hungry eyes. The 3 newcomers turned pale in horror, and their stats dropped by 30%. Joan herself began to worry, but Peter decided to dispel her fear by touching her with the shield, which greatly excited her. This action quickly brought the girl to her senses, so the hero immediately commanded her to take 2 goblins, and he would have wolves on him. They decided to forget about the rest of the heroes for a while, because there would be no use from them. Immediately, monsters began to attack them, thirsting for their death. Peter pierces the wolf's skull with 1 powerful blow, but realizes that, with such a poor weapon, 1 blow will not be enough. He gathers all his strength and cuts the air with a sharp blade. Having hit the wolf, he cuts it in half, blood spills on the ground, and the monster dies. While Peter was distracted by the first creature, a 2nd steppe wolf pounced on him from behind. But having managed to defend himself, the wolf crashed its fangs into the wooden shield. In one movement, he throws the monster away and mercilessly kills it with his sword. Having finished his part, the young man asks Joan what happened to the goblins he had ordered her to kill. But he sees a terrible but partly funny picture. There are so many arrows in the dead goblins that they all look like porcupines. The guy reassured the clearly tense red-haired beauty that they were already dead. The heroes successfully cleared the floor, received rewards, and calmly left the cut into their city. Suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, the earth began to shake and rise upward. It turned out that they began to rise to the next floor. Naturally, the master will continue to rise, but with such weak heroes, it will happen very slowly. Peter approaches Izzy, who yawns sweetly and declares that she is very tired, not understanding why a small creature could be tired when others are fighting. After going into the arsenal, he analyzes his changes and realizes that his intelligence has decreased by 1, but his strength has increased by 2. His stats have increased by only 4, and his overall leveling speed has improved. He was becoming stronger and stronger. As he exits the armory, he notices Stanley and Phil yelling at Joan as if it was her fault they were there, forgetting that she may have saved their lives just a moment ago. Looking at the 1-star heroes, it became clear why they were considered expendable. He remembered Kevin, who had 2 stars, which meant he was skilled with weapons and apparently he was a good mercenary. An image of Helen, who had 3 stars and was eager to fight without hesitation, immediately flashed through my mind. Then, red-haired Joan came up to Peter and offered to explain everything to the newcomers, but he said that it was not worth wasting his time on them. Looking at the trio who couldn't fight, it was clear that they would soon die and it was pointless to waste energy on them. Phil rudely interrupts their conversation with a question for Peter, who in turn replies that he is not going to pay attention to him. This attitude angered Phil and he grabbed the hero by the collar. The black-haired youth, without thinking, hit the impudent newcomer in the jaw. Looking into the eyes of Phil lying on the ground, he said that while they were hiding behind their backs, they were fighting. And then, without waiting for an answer, he left. The next day after physical training, weapons training began, with Peter practicing his sword skills and Joan practicing archery. That trinity didn't even show up. It seems they were going to look for a way out of here as if there was... The next stage of the training was a joint fight, where Joan shot and Peter fought back with a shield. There were so many arrows that at one point one pierced his thigh. Of course, it was painful, but the hero managed to pull it out, and the wound instantly began to heal. There was no stopping him. He continued to train despite the fact that Joan already wanted to stop, thanks to which they were able to improve their skills. Their training was interrupted by a sharp call to the square from Izzy, who informed everyone that the master had entered the game. The girl was happy to receive this news because she really wanted to finally test herself in battle with her newly pumped-up skills. Peter was surprised by Joan's quick mastery. Of course, at the square, they were met by a trio of recruits who were already arguing with Izzy, complaining about the food and not wanting to go into battle. Life apparently taught them nothing, as they quickly received a smart kick from the little fairy. Unable to restrain herself any longer, the fairy pounced on the pile, where she cruelly beat the annoying heroes who begged for mercy. Their faces after the fight with the little one should have been seen. Swollen as if from wasp stings, all bruised and scratched, the guys who once screamed at the top of their voices for freedom were now silently trying to survive the pain. The entire group of heroes was transported to the battlefield, where, as usual, only Peter and Joan were ready to fight. With quick, powerful strikes, they dealt with all the monsters on this floor. To be honest, they themselves were already bored with these monotonous battles, because they easily coped with killing such weak creatures. Unfortunately, the legendary trio stood around the whole time and made no effort to prove themselves on the battlefield. But the other 2 heroes got all the experience. Suddenly, a message appears on the screen advising them to repeat the game so that the disobedient heroes can start fighting. This news does not make the guy and the girl very happy. So, they are transported back to the first floor, where they were before. They are attacked by low-level goblins in small numbers. Joan instantly kills all the enemies, and the mission is completed. And again, this unfortunate offer to repeat the passage appears, because the lazy heroes again stood still instead of using this chance. Quickly passing tests one after another, killing monsters, the heroes are not given a break, but are sent back again. The already tired couple tries to catch their breath and hopes that they will not be sent to fight goblins again. Luckily, they are released from the battlefield through the cutback. Joan is terribly tired, and she is tired of guarding cowardly guys. She really wants this to stop as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the launch of the synthesis process is announced, and the doors to the hall open. Stanley, Phil, and Charlie look in that direction with disbelief and do not understand what is about to happen. At this point, we are introduced to the map of the area. The map shows the workshop, the square, the summoning hall, the air terminal, the training arena, and the residential area. Now let's return to the entrance to the synthesis hall, where the master will now choose who to sacrifice and who to improve. He knows about the achievements of the heroes, who fights and who just stands aside. The little keeper commands Joan and Stanley to immediately undergo synthesis, as the master himself has chosen them. The old man, in a panic, begins to justify himself by saying that he was dragged here against his will, but no one cares about his opinion. Peter puts Stanley in his place, reminding him that all this time he stood behind others during battles, that he was given the chance to prove himself several times, and he himself happily missed them all. Forced into the synthesis room, he still tries to scream and beg to be let out. He is scared and confused. Sometime later, the synthesis process begins and the terrified old man begins to disappear in a blue flame. The uncomprehending Joan, who saw with her own eyes how the man disappeared, comes out of there safe and sound with an increased level and a new skill, Eagle Eye. In a menacing voice, Izzy commands Peter and Phil to go to the synthesis. A worried Phil looks at Peter's calm expression. He doesn't know what will happen now, and to which of them. Phil starts laughing hysterically, thinking that he is about to be sent home and will be free. His dying cry echoes across the square, and Peter, already pumped up thanks to the synthesis, emerges from the hall. Joan realized that if the master decided that he no longer needed the hero, he would simply disappear into this room. On the one hand, it was creepy, but she herself had complained about the annoying newcomers. The next day, Joan, as soon as she saw Peter in the training arena, immediately bowed to him, which embarrassed him because it was unnecessary. The girl explains that this is her way of showing that she will now count on him, since he said that if she sticks with him, it will save her life. At this moment, Charlie bursts onto the site. The only one of the three who did not undergo synthesis and remained alive, he immediately apologized for his behavior and expressed a desire to change for the better. Peter throws a training spear at him, saying that he, like Charlie, couldn't do anything at the beginning, and that he will have to try hard to achieve good results and survive. The spear is the easiest weapon for a beginner to master. He will have to train with it and stand in a position for average combat. The black-haired man commanded the newcomer to prepare for a training fight. In one movement, Peter flies up to the dumbfounded blonde. Taking all his courage into a fist, Charlie nevertheless swings, closing his eyes. It is this mistake that allows Peter to attack him with a kick to the stomach, since he is left unprotected. The poor guy starts vomiting from the powerful blow straight to the ground. In a stern tone, Peter says that if he has someone to come home for, then he should fight with all his might. Charlie had a little sister, to whom anything could happen if he couldn't get out of this place. He brought the sharp end of the sword to the new guy's throat and told him to think about synthesis, because it wasn't that useless, especially if he didn't want to die at the hands of monsters. Next to them, an announcement appeared about the creation of an additional building of the arsenal, namely a forge, which will be very useful to the hero in the future. Calling out to Izzy, who immediately appeared next to him, Peter asked if she was forming messages with advice and if she could log on to the internet. It turned out that the fairy had access to a strategy forum, which Peter knew a lot about because he was also a player. And he also mentioned a very famous player, Leo, which surprised the keeper very much. She began to praise the master of all masters, the god of this game named Leo, saying that he would be in first place if he got even one 7-star hero. Peter asked what it was about Leo that had hooked her so much. It turned out that he could make the impossible possible, according to Izzy, to which the guy smiled sarcastically. The fairy tries to tell her something else about her beautiful Leo, but Peter gently stops her. The phrase bursts out of his mouth that he is the real Leo, whom she praises so much. The keeper falls into a stupor and says that this is some kind of stupid lie, but the hero interrupts her, dictating the account number, which only the owner and manager of the server can know. In an emergency, Izzy goes into her computer and tries to get to the bottom of the truth by looking for her beloved Leo's account. And as soon as she realizes that the real Leo was in front of her all this time, she flies up to him with a pen and a notebook for an autograph. She says that she is a member of a fan club, and if she gets Leo's autograph, she can become a top-level member, which is a very honorable thing. Suddenly, a wave of shame runs through her for having said so many things to the real Leo. Izzy suddenly remembers about Nilf-Hair Leo. She excitedly asks Peter what will happen to him without him, but he himself does not know. Nilfheer is the settlement of the character Leo. 13 floors of a huge fortress with a capacity of 20,000 people, where most of the buildings are upgraded to levels 1822. But the master himself is now inside the game. The guardian fairy is worried about the inhabitants of his settlement, but Peter indifferently suggests that she disband the settlement if she is so worried about them. It turns out that Anything is the master of this account, a person from Earth, and the heroes who are called here are not artificial intelligence at all, but real people coming from different worlds. A simple player who enjoys playing does not know about this. For him, heroes are just consumables that can be exposed to any danger. Peter wanted to ask Izzy if he could return home if he climbed to the top of the tower, but alas, the fairy did not know anything about this, nor about who moved him here. The keeper reveals to him that she has the right to give the master advice on opening and closing buildings, to help in choosing something, but that is where her powers end. The system for creating an infinite number of heroes with thousands of different skill combinations turned out to be a lie. Quantum artificial intelligence was a scam, heroes turned out to be real people rather than advanced machines, endless content options were actually a million different worlds. Who would have thought that what is happening in the game is real? Leo's thoughtless actions in the past doomed many people to death. Peter told Izzy to listen to him if she wanted to climb up, and she obediently agreed with her idol Leo. Analyzing his team members at the next training session, Peter highlighted some points for himself. Joan is simply a genius. She is growing at a speed that is inaccessible to other heroes. She holds a dagger for the first time, but very quickly got the hang of it. You can't say the same about Charlie. With his success, he's more likely to die on the battlefield. After training, Joan decided to call herself Peter's #1 assistant, but Izzy immediately glared at her and declared that she was #1. Overexcited, the little fairy almost let it slip that Peter was Leo's master, but he shut her up in time. The heroes decided to walk around the city. Peter asked to open the warehouse for them, and now obedient Izzy unquestioningly fulfilled his request. Inside were useful materials such as iron, leather, and boards. Then they went to the forge, which the fairy successfully opened for the team. While standing at the hot furnace to craft gear, the game started to introduce penalties for not having a building upgrade, a master blacksmith, or a blueprint, which made the chance of success terrible. Peter decides to start creating items and chooses the extreme hell difficulty level, which terribly scares the keeper because there is a triple penalty. But he only asks her to watch what he is going to do now. This is a master minigame that is often skipped, although the rewards can be substantial. Peter had a 3-minute timer that he had to create a weapon in. He calmly pressed start and the timer started. At that very moment, Master Leo demonstrated the legendary movement of 1,000 hands, which enchanted the Guardian Fairy. And here is absolute success. Peter receives a forged longsword rank, C, strong, light, sharp. He then creates with equal ease a balanced short bow, a sharp long spear, and a strong iron shield. Stretching, the hero exits the minigame so as not to attract unnecessary attention. He decided to stop at these items for now. The next day, Joan admires the new bow, but Peter warns her to use the personal weapon feature to prevent it from being stolen. This time, the master decided to send the heroes together to fight the harpies and goblins. The heroes divided up the duties and went into battle. With a terrible, deafening scream, a pack of monsters attacked the group. Charlie, feeling fear, waved his weapon in different directions, which greatly worsened his characteristics. To avoid failure, Joan gave him a good slap in the face to get his fighting spirit back on track. Quickly realizing that his life was in danger if he did not pull himself together immediately, he focused and returned to the fight. After clearing the floor, the new guy, disappointed in himself, began to express concerns about his future, since he was performing poorly in combat. At that moment, a notification popped up about Charlie being added to favorites, which indicated that the master liked him. Unable to contain his delight, the boy exclaimed to the whole square that he was able to do it. Joan noticed that Peter's first subordinate had succeeded, and now the second one had succeeded. But Peter immediately said that they were not his subordinates. He fondly remembered his real subordinates from Nilfheim, where the group of 5 people were all level 99 6-star heroes with their own divine and other powerful skills. He hoped that he could meet them someday. Master Leo was calm about his world because it was an AFK game, so Hannah, the Vice Master, would be able to handle the controls, especially since Holy was ensuring her. They were both so smart that he sometimes wondered if it was really artificial intelligence. Here we suddenly see Hannah standing on the edge of Nilfheim, and behind her, in a white robe, is Holy. Holly doesn't believe that the girl is going to leave their settlement. It turns out that Hannah is going to look for the master. Holy can't help her, so she leaves the research on the night girl. They say goodbye, wishing each other good luck. Returning to the main square, the heroes notice that the master has begun actively improving the residential and training area. 3 structures of the arsenal, blacksmith, carpenter's workshop, and metalworking workshop, formed a common building, the equipment workshop, and the entire area was upgraded to the 2nd level. Charlie and Joan are surprised by such a quick transformation and do not understand how this is possible. But Peter said that the master simply invested money because, in all likelihood, he liked the game. Appeased by the master's gifts, Izzy congratulates the heroes on their luck in finding a master who has enough money for a set for 65,000 won. According to the rules of the game, masters are not awarded crystals for winning tasks, and there are only a few other ways to earn them inside the game. Meeting a player who is ready to invest real money is a great success. Suddenly, an announcement is made about the arrival of 10 new heroes. The gates open, and a bright light pours out. There are only 2 ways to summon. For in-game gold and advanced summoning for crystals, naturally the second method is much more effective. Men and women of different ages come out onto the square. They are all confused and behave very cautiously. Peter swung his sword and put it to the old man's throat, loudly telling everyone that no one would explain anything to them now. Their only goal was to survive, and whoever remained would be told everything. Izzy got their attention with a furious shout, ordering the carpenters to go to the place she indicated. Everyone began to get indignant, but she continued to distribute the roles of blacksmith, cook, and others. Having armed the first 5, the fairy opened a rift and ordered the heroes to go into battle. Of course, they were all afraid and did not understand at all what was happening. The heroes began to die quickly, which alarmed Joan, and she suggested that they should have been instructed more thoroughly. But Peter calmed her down, saying that it was pointless because if they were dying on the first floor, then there was no point in wasting time on them. Afterwards, the names of the second 5 were announced, who were also absolutely terrified and did not believe in their own strength. Suddenly, Charlie expressed a desire to go to help with the second group, which surprised many. Peter let him go, because his skills were not far behind the newbies and he should gain some experience. The black-haired guy only managed to give instructions to the young assistant so that he would let the newcomers gain some experience. When the last of the newcomers left for the rift, Joan began to complain that she missed home and normal food, because here they only feed her potatoes. Peter told the girl that her wishes and words reach the master, but are heavily filtered. Of course, he does not hear conversations, but he can respond to requests to change something with action. Soon, all 6 returned without losses. Charlie killed only 1 goblin. As promised, he gave the newcomers the opportunity to gain combat experience. The team moved to the living area to finally eat. The heroes saw the updated dining room, which began to look much better. They were happy and were already waiting for new delicious dishes. Isaac was taken aback to find only potatoes and a lot of spices in the kitchen. When Peter looked at his grandfather's skills, he saw that he did not know how to cook at all, and volunteered to be a cook apparently because he did not want to fight. All this time he was lying to the team. The guy immediately offered Chloe, a young girl with culinary skills, to become their cook instead of the old liar. Isaac began to quickly get out of the situation because it was beneficial for him to sit in a peaceful city, so he began to offer to give him a chance to cook something. But Peter sternly refused him and warned him to never lie again. After some time, the entire table was covered with potatoes in different forms. Boiled, stewed, fried, with different spices and shapes, everything looked incredibly delicious. Over a communal dinner, Joan shared her experiences with the new recruits, reassuring them that she herself was just as timid and poor at handling weapons. Peter turned to Chloe and Earl, who were confused about what they should do, but they were the only ones who would not fight, as their help to the team would consist of cooking and making equipment. Unfortunately, the number of places in the settlement is limited, so if a character with better skills appears, Chloe and Earl will be removed from their positions as cook and carpenter and sent into battle. The next day, 3 young guys joined the main combat group, Greg, Hugh, and Duke. Apparently the rest of the heroes were scared and looking for a place to hide. Charlie had a bad influence on them. Now they called Peter brother. Their difference in characteristics was 7 to 8 points, like between a child and an adult. On Earth, such a sharp increase in strength would have been simply impossible. Capable Joan has reached level 5 in archery basics and level 2 in dagger mastery. Unfortunately, Charlie's spear mastery is also at level 2, but it doesn't improve any further. He trains more than anyone else, but doesn't gain any skills. The trio had mastered the first level of sword mastery. Their development was very similar, probably due to the same age, but they were still better than those who hid in their homes. Soon the master summoned 10 more heroes. This time Charlie and the others managed to cope without Peter. During the selection, only 1 person died on the battlefield. There were more, but this is not the end. Joan was worried that the master was not taking them to the 5th floor because a lot of time had passed since the last cleaning. Peter explained that the 5th floor would have a sharp jump in difficulty, similar to a boss level, where the guy himself is not sure that he can survive, so the master is in no hurry to send the heroes to their deaths. As a result of the call, the master had 6 1-star combat heroes: Joan, Peter, Charlie, Greg, Hugh, and Duke. The supporting heroes also included one-star characters: Earl, a carpenter, and Chloe, a cook. The next day came and a new battle on the fourth floor with goblins and harpies. The team lined up with Greg and Hugh defending in front with shields, Duke behind them with a spear, and Peter and Joan backing them up. By working as a team, the weaker ones will be able to improve instead of individual dominance, using a combination of each person's strengths. Peter wasn't going to participate in the fight, otherwise they simply wouldn't be able to gain experience in teamwork because the guy could easily clear the entire floor by himself. The group successfully cleared the floor, and the satisfied trio happily walked out of the gate. However, Master Leo knew that there was a task on the fifth floor that he could not handle alone, so they would have to prepare for anything. Joan was pleased with the newcomers and praised them for their efforts. Peter agreed with her. From the second pack of 10 heroes, the master pulled out a blacksmith, a tanner, and a carpenter. They began to work in the workshop to create equipment, mainly low-ranking swords and shields that were given to beginners, and the main group received high-quality equipment. 3 useless heroes were sent to be synthesized. They never showed up for training and said they would run away at the first opportunity. Among them was Isaac, who lied about his ability to cook. A few days later, Peter suggested that they would be able to go up to the 5th floor today, to which Izzy confirmed his guess. The young man warned that this would not be a regular floor sweep, so that the group would not tense up yet, but also not relax too much. Everyone except Duke was moved to a ruined city, which was in a terrible state, completely lifeless, with fires burning somewhere. Everyone was on guard, because the monsters were nowhere to be seen. But the leader, Peter, commanded the heroes to line up in order to reach the city center. The group walked through a completely empty city. There were traces of dried blood everywhere. This place was completely different from their usual battlefield. The leader commanded the red-haired girl to climb a high tower to survey the area. Joan looked around the city carefully, but then in the distance she saw something terrible that she couldn't believe. It was a huge horde of goblins. There were thousands of them. There was no end in sight to this terrible wave. It turned out that they had to survive, and not clear the floor. Peter explained that they would need to survive for a certain amount of time without dying, and only then would they be able to complete the mission. Hugh suggested that they just hide, but all the doors were locked and they had to leave here. Charlie asked how long they would have to fight, to which Peter calmly replied that it would only be 10 minutes after they encountered the enemy. Peter looked up to see a timer set for a full 30 minutes, which was terrifying. It only had a 9% chance of happening, but they were clearly out of luck. The heroes had to choose the first alley they came across. It had small passages, thanks to which the monsters would not be able to break through in a wide line, which would greatly facilitate the course of the battle. The team leader ordered Charlie to hold the right passage, Greg and Hugh to cover the rear. He himself stood up to defend the left passage, warning that they would fight in bursts, using every minute wisely. Joan needed to stay in the center, shoot only on Peter's command, and try to conserve arrows. Suddenly, the first goblin runs out from around the corner and the timer starts counting down. The goblin pounces on Peter, who has not yet managed to build barricades, breaking everything in his path. The terrible roar and stomping of thousands of bloodthirsty monsters makes the team prepare for a terrible battle. At that very moment, the team leader gets the idea to make barricades from the corpses of the creatures, and he tells everyone about it, to which the heroes obediently agree. Peter's tactics were simple: block and strike, quickly and accurately killing one nasty goblins after another. A frightened Charlie asks if they really need to fight for 10 minutes, to which the black-haired guy answers in the affirmative, so as not to worry the team once again. Monsters with burning eyes and hungry grins occupy the entire passage with their bodies. There are so many of them that they have to climb over each other's heads just to get to the heroes. The fight continued fiercely, and Peter ordered Greg to switch with Hugh. But the guy said that he still had strength. The leader sharply told him to shut up and follow the command. Greg's problem was not only his level and poor technique, but also that he was overexcited and spent too much energy. One hit was enough to kill a goblin. There were some on the first floor, so it wasn't difficult if you stick to the tactic: hit, block, and hit again. But there were too many of them too. Peter ordered the guys to change again. He assigned them the weakest spot, which is understandable because they are still inexperienced fighters. He then commanded Joan to help Greg, asking her to try to take the arrows that she would use. The fighting girl had already been waiting for her turn and began to boldly kill the creatures that were breaking through their defense. Already tired, Charlie shouts to Peter that the fight should only last 10 minutes, but it seems to him that more has passed. The leader responds to him by saying that only 5 minutes have passed and that he should not relax. Goblins attack the group in an endless stream, and at some point one of them gets too close and tears off Greg's arm. He screams in horror from pain and shock. blood gushing from his shoulder like a river. Peter, like a true fighter, cold-bloodedly orders Hugh to replace his wounded comrade, not paying any attention to him, because there is no time for this. Due to the terrible pain, Greg experiences fear, and his characteristics drop even lower. He cries. Enraged, Peter pushes away the monsters, who have already become quite annoying to him. They crawl like parasites. Nothing stops them. Joan approaches the wounded guy and tells him to pull himself together. She bandages the rest of his arm, saying that if he doesn't start fighting, then Hugh will simply be killed. At this point, Hugh warns that his weapon has become dull, and Greg, overcoming himself, gets to his feet to replace it. Of course, this was expected, even though this sword was of a good rank. It was still a simple iron weapon that Hugh had to repair urgently. While mercilessly killing the goblins without stopping, Peter said that they should fight with shields if they did not have a blade. Motivating the heroes to fight on, the leader says that they only have 3 minutes left to hold out in this hell. But inside, he was indignant that half an hour had lasted so long. Peter ordered Joan to switch positions with Charlie and return to the middle. Hugh also had to replace the already exhausted Greg, who was fighting with all his might. The girl was immediately told to help Hugh with arrows, but seeing that there were literally a few arrows left, Peter commanded not to save arrows. Otherwise, it would be the end for everyone if the goblins broke through. Joan began a spectacular shooting at every creature that tried to approach the group. Hugh, in turn, finished off the goblins wounded by arrows with his sword at close range. Just as Greg wanted to say that he was ready to exchange, a vile creature pierced him with a sharp blade and lifted him above itself. Joan notices that Greg is in the clutches of the enemy and shoots the goblin accurately, who falls and lets go of the guy. The girl runs up to the young man in horror, who has fallen on the asphalt and is vomiting blood, on the verge of death. The red-haired beauty looks at her barely breathing comrade. She is struggling with doubts about whether to take out or leave the goblin's weapon in her body. Greg only makes plaintive groans. All dirty and exhausted, Hugh begs Greg to help him for at least half a minute. Hearing this, Peter punches several goblins at once with a powerful blow, so that they fall backwards from the impact, pushing the others away. Running up to the guy, the leader ordered him to move to the left flank, and he himself would sort things out here. A notice appears about Greg's death. Saddened by Joan, who was sitting next to his corpse, they are ordered to return to the fight again, because there is nothing to help their former comrade. Quickly pulling herself together, the girl begins to attack enemies and increases her level of dagger mastery. Very tired, she asks how soon the meat grinder will end. Peter quickly has to change the subject to the fact that since she has the opportunity to ask about it, she should better deal with the goblins. Suddenly, a cry for help is heard. Hugh falls to the ground, bleeding, and a giant wave of mad goblins moves towards him. Peter realizes that the guy can no longer be helped, and a crowd of creatures covers him, cutting him down at the same moment. The leader understands that it is time to retreat and drags his remaining comrades along with him. Stopping at the wall, Joan is commanded to climb it. Approaching enemies will have to be hit several at a time. Now the tactic of one blow, one corpse, was not enough. Meanwhile, Joan climbed up and shouted that she was ready to help them climb up. With a deft leap, Peter grabs the handrails at the top of the wall. Charlie grabs the girl's hand, but does not have time to get up, as the goblin inserts a blade into his left leg. The leader has to jump down to kill the enemy who prevented Charlie from climbing up. The strong girl had to hold her hanging comrade by the hand the whole time. Once down, Peter realizes that they don't have time and will have to cut off the injured leg. With one swing of his sword, he cuts off Charlie's leg, and he howls in agony from the terrible torture. Joan struggles to lift the wounded man up. The black-haired young man tries to help her somehow. Looking down, the heroes realize that the goblins have begun to climb over each other's heads to get to their victims. Joan and Peter began to fight off the crowd of creatures together, stabbing them with a spear and a sword so that they could not reach them. The heroes were at a dead end. They had nowhere to run. All they could do was fight for their lives with their last strength. The girl's weapon was immediately snatched from her hands and she had to kick the monsters with her foot, since she had no other weapon. The leader shouted that there were only 30 seconds left to hold out, which was true. But the creatures went wild and began to furiously attack the exhausted team. Having climbed the wall, one of the goblins suddenly got so close to the guy that he was able to pierce his belly with his sword. With all his might, Peter cut open the impudent creature that dared to wound him. At the same moment, the goblins reach the red-haired girl, making her bleed. Surrounded by a crowd of enemies, the hero understands that this is the end, that he will die on the fucking 5th floor. He was indignant, because it turns out that all this torment was a waste of time. And it is then that a furious force awakens within him, which prompts him to go into battle again. A horde of monsters rushes towards him, eager to tear the man to pieces. A primal anger awakens in Peter. His eyes light up with hellish flames and he seems to turn into an animal. As he approaches, he looks furiously straight into the eyes of death. He is already ready to destroy each of them. However, time is running out, and the crowd of enemies begins to evaporate in blue rays. The monster's hand, eager to tear Peter's face to shreds, only manages to scratch it and disappears. The group of heroes is transported to the hall. They defeated the enemies and cleared the 5th floor. Now the daily dungeons were available to them. Joan and Charlie dropped their weapons at the same moment and fell exhausted to the floor, while Peter froze with a devastated look. The girl, with an awkward laugh, asks the leader to help her up. She excitedly asks if this will happen every time now. The young man replies that it was a special occasion. For a well-coordinated group, such tasks are not a problem. Unfortunately, they were given them at the worst possible moment. The wounded, exhausted heroes are the only 3 to emerge from the rift. Peter helps Charlie walk, as he has not fully recovered. The cheerful Duke runs up to meet them, congratulating them on their victory. He asks where Greg and Hugh are, thinking that the guys are still inside. But he is pierced by a shocking answer about their death. The guy is dumbfounded with horror. Suddenly, the master announces a meeting, and the 3 survivors walk through the square past frightened people. As soon as Peter entered the room, he fell exhausted onto his bed. Now he has 2 abilities. Cold-blooded, helps to stay calm in any situation, and berserk, the complete opposite, exchanging sanity for increased combat power. The guy still had a lot to learn, but clearly not today. He falls asleep, thinking about tomorrow's affairs. The next day, when he arrived at the training arena, he saw Joan, who was already training when she was usually still asleep at this time. She had learned a new skill yesterday, but Charlie doesn't even get rewarded for his hard work. Peter's current skill ceiling is level 5, which is usually how 3-star heroes grow, but he almost died at the maximum level 10, which indicated a quick increase to 2 stars. A red-haired girl came up to him, sat down at his level, fascinated by his figure, and began to touch him, which outraged the hero. She admired his endurance, although she herself was at the same level, because she recovered very quickly from yesterday, unlike Charlie, who did not come to training. Other heroes just pretend to be busy with something so as not to go to synthesis. They only run to training when the master is in the game. Suddenly, Charlie appears on the platform with a terribly guilty expression on his face, starting to apologize for his weakness, because if it weren't for him, those 2 could have survived yesterday. But Peter only said that they themselves were to blame for their weakness. A whole month has passed since Peter entered the game. In the real world, about 10 days. He managed to calculate that the difference in time is 3 times different. And in battle, game and real-time coincide. The guy also noticed that the master logs into the game in the morning, afternoon, and evening. His train of thought is interrupted by a proud fairy who loudly shouts about how great Peter is for being able to clear the 5th floor with such incompetence in his group. Joan approaches the hero with suspicion to find out what he did with Izzy, why she is behaving so strangely, but the young man does not reveal his secrets. The keeper angrily scolds the other slackers for not trying to increase their strength and improve their skills. Suddenly, an invitation appears to enter the rift for Peter, Joan, and 3 other heroes. On the gates with daily quests, which are now open for passing, various hints appear, as well as the time until the change to the next location. One of the group anxiously asks if they will have to fight. The leader contemptuously tells him not to worry. The group entered the Kendert Forest, a daily dungeon where they must gather materials and return after the time has passed. A wary Joan, not seeing any enemies, worries that this could be another special mission. But Peter reassures her that all she needs to do is collect all sorts of resources. A portal appeared next to the guys. The leader immediately explained to the team that this was a storage facility where all the collected materials would need to be dumped, which would later become new items. He ordered the 3 to stay and collect useful resources, while he and the red-haired girl went hunting. An unusual deer was calmly grazing on the edge of an emerald-colored forest. Joan's eyes lit up instantly because she really wanted to finally eat some meat, and not just choke on potatoes. Immediately, the arrow accurately pierces the animal's neck. It writhes in terrible pain and roars. As soon as the creature falls to the ground, the girl runs up and joyfully begins to cut up the carcass. She masterfully carries out this vile act. Peter tells her to stay here and finish the dismemberment, and he goes on his way. There was only half an hour left to be in this wonderful oasis of endless resources, so he hurried to find new prey for dinner in the settlement. At the watering hole, he notices a rare monster. The queen of the forest. Her distinctive feature is a large golden horn on her forehead. Thanks to such creatures, the heroes receive material for raising the hero, a low-ranking attribute stone. In an instant, he cuts down the forest deer standing nearby, not sparing a single one. and before him rises the majestic, enraged queen of the forest, who is already prepared to take revenge. After some time, in the initial location of the forest, the frightened heroes who remained to collect materials saw a monster. Behind the leaves of the trees in the shadows, the fiery eye of a monster peered out, ready to devour them. Literally a few moments later, Peter emerges from there, carrying the defeated monster with the golden horn on his shoulder. He throws the deer's head on the ground and asks the girl to help him with it. While Joan was cleaning up the storage, she said she had already managed to kill 2 deer and 1 wild boar. She asked what the most disgusting tasting part of the deer's body, the head, was for. And it turned out that Peter only needed the horn, which, unfortunately, he couldn't get out of her. Happy Joan began to skillfully carve the precious horn from her head, thereby gaining the skill Forest Hunter. In Peter's hands was a low ragn stone of the wind attribute, filled with forest energy, which will need to be used to create items and increase the rank of heroes. Returning home, they were greeted by a table completely covered with various meat dishes, which they all missed terribly. Joan came to Peter after dinner with the good news that everyone had eaten a whole deer, after which the guy invited her to go with him to the dungeons. Daily dungeons change every 2 days. Monday, Tuesday is Israelt Mine. Wednesday, Thursday is Kendrick Forest. On Friday and Saturday, the Sinmeal Plateau is available, but only on Sunday does access to all locations open at once. Today, the Sinmeal Plateau was available, where we went this time, just the 2 of us, Peter and Joan. The breathtaking view from the top captured the girl's spirit, and she looked into the distance with delight. Peter noticed the flowers of life. They are quite useful, as they are the basis for a health potion. He planned to collect them, but a huge monster suddenly attacked them. The team immediately reacted to it, and together they began to fight the wolf in a coordinated manner. Their coordinated work helped to bring down the huge carcass of the beast quickly and without difficulty. Joan immediately set about ripping open the wolf, as there was very little time before the others caught the scent of blood. In his hands, Peter was already holding a low-ranking stone of the water attribute, filled with plateau energy, which had the same properties as the previous one. Happy Joan loved it when they just hunted and gathered. She wanted it to be that way all the time. Peter thought that it would be a real paradise if it weren't for the master, and then he realized that he himself was the same player. He was horrified that the people of Nilfheer could think the same about Leo. Peter suggested that she do this instead of fighting. The girl would have gladly agreed, but she understood that everything depended on the situation in the settlement. She asked him why he was offering this to her if he himself was not going to leave the front lines, which surprised Peter. He clearly did not expect such directness and did not know what to answer. A few days later, the fighting trio headed to the 6th floor, this time joined by young Duke. The heroes had to go on a reconnaissance mission and explore an unfamiliar location. Charlie became worried because he didn't see any enemies nearby, but Peter shut him up, ordering him to be quiet, apparently noticing something. After walking a little further, the group saw 3 goblins sitting quietly in a clearing. Noticing a horn on one of them's belt, it became clear that there was help somewhere nearby. Climbing up the tree, Joan carefully examined the area and saw a settlement of goblins, of which there were about 100. Peter realized that it was a trap if they had carelessly gone into battle with the monsters. The guys came up with a plan on how to carefully get rid of the enemies that were bothering them. Duke was given a simple task to start with. He had to cover his comrades if something went wrong. The fight began with a well-aimed arrow to the goblin's head from Joan. Immediately, one of the monsters grabbed his horn and tried to call for reinforcements. Peter, with a deft movement of his sword, immediately cut off the attempt to call for help along with the goblin's head. Having quickly dealt with the 3 creatures, the heroes began to be covered in blue flames in disappointment in order to be transported to the settlement. However, their leader jumped out of the circle and ran off into the distance. He knew that there must be a clue about the next stage somewhere here, because reconnaissance missions can help to find out information about what will happen in the future. Having reached the habitat of the monsters, he saw how more advanced goblins keep raging wolves on chains. Hiding behind the fence, he looked at the village of creatures but did not understand how big it was. At that very moment, he was transported into the hall. Joan asked the young man where he had run off to so suddenly, but he only calmly replied that he was looking around. But in his head, he analyzed what was happening, realizing that it depended only on the master's attention whether he would understand these clues during reconnaissance or not. Coming out to the square, a frightened Chloe immediately runs up to him and tells him that some strangers, unlike the others, came, and they were armed. Peter immediately realized that the new heroes were not simple, but high-ranking and very dangerous. A charmed Izzy flies up to the guy and shares with him the information that the master had bought the beginner's kit for 50,000 won. The young man reassured Chloe that they wouldn't do anything to her, they were just a little special, and told her to return to the kitchen. A group of heroes saw a sultry, black-haired beauty leaning against the wall of the building. Joan immediately came running to her, eager to meet the new, clearly strong person. The frightened girl introduced herself as Emma, and Joan, in turn, introduced her to the seemingly indifferent, but actually kind Peter. Emma turned out to be a 3-star thief-class hero who had little strength and health, but she had no shortage of agility. Peter immediately invited the girl to talk to the dining room to find out if she remembered anything, but unfortunately, the beauty only knew that she was sent here to fight, and only a little about synthesis, and when she tried to remember more, her head began to hurt like crazy. With difficulty remembering, she told how she was part of the group Wolves of Destruction, how she was at work in Halcyon and then woke up here. Outside the window, Izzy's menacing voice rang out, calling the heroes to the square. A huge man walked out of the dining room, brazenly taking with him a whole deer leg. Chloe immediately became worried that this would have been enough for 5 people. But now, no one but the impudent newcomer would get it. A terrifying group of 5 strong recruits stood in front of the gate, awaiting instructions. Their leader is a long-haired guy with a cold look named Adam, a big brute, Bruce, a blue-haired young man, Bobby, Woody, scary as death, and Emma, already known to the heroes. People in a panic started turning to Peter, saying that something was wrong with the newcomers. They had a feeling that they were bad people. The new group entered the rift, and Joan and Peter began to discuss them. The girl thought that Emma was the only normal one among all these heroes. They were interrupted by the voice of a guy who was pestering them, begging for protection from the frightening newcomers. None of them even came close to Duke's strength. They just pretended in front of the master, and then ate the meat that Joan brought. They had a lot of time to master some craft and start being useful, but the only thing they thought about was how to avoid synthesis. Peter looked at them with a chilling coldness in his eyes and furiously drove the impudent idlers away. Charlie, who had begun to feel sorry for them, was brazenly interrupted by Peter, who reminded him that while he was bleeding out surrounded by goblins, these little people were simply eating and sleeping in comfort. Duke approaches the group with his face completely broken. It turns out that he was in a duel, where he managed to get hit so hard. It was time for the scary group to return from the mission. They were clearly disappointed with the ease of the mission. Peter was sitting on their way, and when Adam asked who he was, he brazenly replied that it was none of his business. The giant Bruce started to attack him, but Joan stood up for herself, after which Bobby attacked her with claims. Adam decided to introduce himself to the mysterious stranger and say that he was the captain of this squad, and Peter only coldly gave his name, saying that he was an ordinary farmer. Adam asked if all the locals would gather in the square when the draft would begin, and the guy answered in the affirmative. At this moment, the master began to summon 10 simple heroes along with the synthesis. Izzy was shocked by the new arrivals of talentless people, and in such numbers. Having immediately named several names, she sent the frightened newcomers into the synthesis room. Stunned, Joan couldn't believe that the master would do this to the newly arrived heroes. The formidable Bruce began to search for the heroes that Izzy had just named. He grabbed 2 people by the scruff of the neck and dragged them along the ground all the way to the synthesis hall. People started to run away in panic, and Adam, Bobby, and Woody took out their weapons to catch them like sheep because they are needed for their synthesis. Peter asked the fairy to give the master advice that it would be better not to merge the heroes without any reason. Bruce, who had just left the hall, approached the farmer with a complaint that he should not disturb them. But the guy decided to get into trouble by answering him rudely. The instantly enraged man raised his axe at Peter to show him his place. His strike is interrupted by an arrow fired by Joan, which flies right in front of his face. Adam had already turned to the boys with hostility, and Emma, who tried to stop him, received a strong blow to the stomach from him. Adam thrust his long sword in front of Peter's head and threatened to kill him. But the guy, calling them trash, finally angered the team. The keeper bursts into the tense situation with a cry that the heroes cannot fight among themselves, because the master may punish them for this. But it was too late, because both sides were ready to tear each other apart. Peter realized that in front of him was an ordinary gang of bandits. This attack on them greatly offended Adam, who had initially been patient with the guy but now clearly wanted to kill him. Peter addresses Izzy, saying that such heroes will only get in the way, causing chaos in the settlement and lowering the overall efficiency. Thus, they are ballast that needs to be gotten rid of. It is after these words that the seemingly ordinary farmer challenges the 3-star hero to a duel. Peter explains that he knows people like him very well. First, he asked if all the residents were in the square to understand if there could be someone strong in the settlement. And when they realized that there were no strong ones, They completely lost their fear and used the newcomers who had just been called. Joan, shocked by such behavior, did not understand what was happening. Peter said that everything was simple. If he wins, they absorb Adam during synthesis, and if the other wins, they absorb him. The girl was ordered to lead people from the battlefield to a residential area for safety. The duelists agreed that the end of the fight is not death, but a request for mercy, since the loser is needed alive for synthesis. With a powerful lunge, Adam lunges at Peter, swinging his sword. However, the hero, who had been standing there until now and had not even taken out his weapon, suddenly goes into berserker mode. A second before the blow, a furious Peter slides behind his enemy, leaving a trail of burning eyes. With one blow, he smashes his face into the cobblestones. It becomes covered in blood, and some of his teeth simply fall out. He mockingly orders Adam to surrender, and he, barely groaning, utters the phrase that should stop the duel. By forcing the defeated guy to say it again on purpose, he says that he is not going to lag behind him, because the wolves of destruction were not going to lag behind those people. He greedily grabs the poor guy by the face, sending the team, who are worried about Adam, away. Enraged by such rudeness, Woody is already preparing to punish the bastard for his words and actions. Suddenly, Peter turns to Emma, offering to leave the team of dumb bandits for his group. The girl was stunned by such an unexpected proposal, at which point Bruce began yelling at her with all his might, telling her not to dare do such a thing. While Peter's attention was diverted, Adam tried to reach his weapon with his hand, but an attentive farmer cruelly prevents Adam's attempt at sabotage by slamming him into the ground. During this time, Emma managed to make a decision and left the pile of garbage, joining Peter. In this way, she finally drives the trio crazy. Adam tries again to say that he gives up, but Peter interrupts him with a blow and a phrase. Does he really want to die on synthesis? This is the last straw, and the group takes off, planning to take down the vile farmer. The formidable Izzy blocks their path, warning them not to interfere in the duel. Of course, there was no stopping them, and they demanded that the little one get out of their way. This is exactly what Peter was waiting for. The fairy suddenly turned from cute into a bloody monster, ready to kill the bastards. With one powerful blow, she tears three 3-star heroes to shreds at once. Adam immediately turns to Leo and says that he has followed all the instructions, which deserves his praise. He says the long-awaited phrase, and Leo instantly comes out of berserker mode. The master presses the screen in panic many times because he clearly did not expect such an outcome of events. During the synthesis process, Peter gains an increase in the skills Sword and Shield Technique, Basics, and Pain Threshold. Now he has reached the maximum level and needs to increase his rank. It was a pity that the calls were wasted. Even though they were ballast, there were more problems. And now the master was probably beside himself with rage. The hero looks at the master, thinking about his next steps. He hopes that the master will pull himself together. Otherwise, he will never climb to the top of the tower. Peter goes to the dining room where all the residents have gathered, and as soon as he enters, a storm of delight and admiration falls upon him. He tugs at the cheek of the talkative Joan, who told everyone what happened, although she should have kept her mouth shut. Each of the people sincerely thanks for saving them from these terrible villains. One of them says that now the guys will invest and try their best, but Peter says that this is unnecessary. Because now the master is very angry, suddenly everyone hears several names being called, and a terrible smile appears on the guy's face. An excited Joan doesn't understand why they are calling the heroes now. But after Peter's hint, she was taken aback, because it became clear that they were going for synthesis. A disgruntled guy came forward who disagreed with the master's decision and Peter's words. In order to pacify the talentless lazybones, he kicks him in the jaw. The evil keeper flies into the dining room to gather the disobedient heroes. The girl wonders who they will all take after, and Peter suggests that they will take after the new Emma, since she is still at a low level. After completing the synthesis, Emma leaves with a level increase and the acquisition of the skill Trap Disarm. With a murderous look, Peter addresses all the heroes, warning them not to even think about sitting on their necks, because no one is going to protect them. And if they want to survive, then let them prove it. You can see fear in their eyes because some of them don't know how to fight at all and are afraid that they will simply be synthesized. Peter continued, "If someone wants to take up one of the crafts, then let them turn to the craftsman and the cook. If the heroes think they can handle it in close combat, Peter tells them to come to him. Heroes who want to learn how to hunt must go to Joan, and Earl teaches carpentry. After this, Joan runs up to the leader, talking about his kindness. Because he told everything in detail to the rest of the residents, she was right. Because if they listen to the leader, they can avoid a stupid death. They were approaching the 10th floor, and they needed a second group. But not just a bunch of people, but one capable of supervising the main one. When Peter visited Chloe in the dining room the next morning, he saw that she had an assistant, and now they knew how to bake bread. It turned out that the skilled new cook ground the potatoes into flour and baked excellent, tasty bread. Afterwards, the hero went to pick up Emma, and together they went to the training arena. Meeting Joan on the field, he ordered the girls to spar with daggers. Armed, the girls began to fight. Joan was the first to attack the confused Emma. However, she quickly gathered herself and they began to rush around the arena, raising dust that hid their rapid attacks. At some point, Emma falls to the ground and wonders in surprise whether the red-haired winner was previously a mercenary or a warrior, but learns that she is the daughter of a simple hunter. Joan shares with her partner that she was quite weak at first, but diligent training has significantly increased her strength. Peter says that everything depends on her efforts, so she needs to try even though she is a 3-star hero. Looking around, the hero noticed that there were more people on the training field after yesterday's synthesis performance. Although it is not a matter of personal choice, they will have to increase their own importance in order to survive. But given that all positions are occupied, there are still 2 places left for synthesis. The black-haired young man notices one of the guys training very hard and approaches him. After meeting a young man named Jerry, he learns that he used to be a porter for mercenaries and planned to become a real mercenary in the future. Peter was satisfied with this answer and suggested that Jerry test his strength in a fight with him. That same evening, the weeding out of newcomers began, and although Charlie constantly participated in battles, he was not chosen for promotion. 2 people died during the synthesis, thanks to which Jerry rose to the 3rd level. The rest were sent to the daily dungeons, and the mine from which the fire attribute stone could be obtained was still closed. At dawn, Peter decided to gather the 5 best fighting heroes, who were clearly not happy about getting up so early. The leader asked if they knew why they had come, but only Duke could answer this question. He realized that they were about to choose members of the group. The guy prepared colored sticks for the draw in advance. Holding out a glass, he commanded that they should split into 2 groups of 3. In the first one, Peter became the leader, and Emma was appointed as the second. Joan, of course, began to appear, because she thought that she would be a great leader. The young man explained that it was dangerous to focus on the growth of just one group, citing the example of an incident on the 5th floor that could have resulted in the death of all the valuable players, thus conveying the value of dividing into groups. Of course, if all the floors could be cleared by one person, then there would be no point in dividing into groups. But soon the number of people needed for clearing will begin to grow, including on special missions, where dozens and hundreds of heroes can participate simultaneously. Peter showed stripes of 2 colors, which meant that the red ones would stay with him, and the blue ones would go to Emma's group. Charlie and Joan got the red marks. They happily accepted this result, because they will be together with the trusted Peter. Duke and Jerry were a little disappointed in their luck, as Emma was a stranger to them in terms of leadership and companionship. The Reds' leader playfully hinted that the second team would have to work hard to catch up if they didn't want to be left behind. Emma looked Peter in the eye with determination and said confidently that she was not going to lose. The next day, Peter, Joan, and Charlie went to clear the 7th floor. Their leader asked not to interfere, as he wants to try to deal with the goblins alone. He immediately goes into berserker mode. His strength grows, his eyes light up, and he begins the fight. With quick, powerful movements, he destroys enemies one after another, leaving them no chance to live. Having dealt with all the goblins, he returns to his normal state and notices the last monster, deciding that he will not bother them. The decision is made to leave him alone. It's time for reconnaissance, and Peter notes that it's raining. There's a river running nearby and the dam may be destroyed. The trio successfully completes the floor and calmly returns back, making plans for the rest of the day. Suddenly, a notification appears about purchasing a double beginner's pack, which contains 5,000 crystals and 100,000 gold. Peter asks Charlie to bring Emma and orders Joan to bring the lot urgently. The master begins 2 high-quality summons for 1,000 crystals. The young man realized that the master was someone who usually did not buy anything, but could not stop once he started. He remembers how he himself just started playing Choose Me. Peter understands that new users are attracted by the synthesis system, battles, watching living heroes. Characters follow orders and instructions. The master needs to come up with different strategies. With each level of difficulty, the content changes, which attracts players. Interrupting the hero's thoughts, a beautiful young girl and a courageous gray-haired knight come out into the square. However, the treacherous hem of her dress gets caught under her foot, and the girl falls to the ground with a crash. Joan, returning with the draw, looks at the poor girl and asks what happened here. But the indifferent Peter only tells her not to pay attention to it. Emma notices that this is not an ordinary girl, but an aristocrat. It turns out that she began to understand people well after she was a mercenary. Knight Ronald understood the concept of master, summon, and synthesis, but he didn't know anything about levels and skills. He was a guardian of a big city, and he looks like a completely normal person if you forget about his excessive sense of duty. Peter announced the start of the draw with Emma. Now blue meant the old man, and red meant the girl. Joan was in such a hurry to get to the young man that she accidentally tripped over a pebble in the road. Very fortunately, the farmer notices a red mark on one of the sticks when it jumps out a little due to the shaking of the glass. But seeing Emma's sly smile, he realized that she too had managed to notice the mark. As soon as the glass touches the paving stones, both instantly pounce on the left stick with the blue mark. However, an unexpected flame behind their backs stops the heroes from making a hasty choice. Each of them realizes that the girl turned out to be a fire mage and immediately begin to fight for the right red wand. Turning around to look at the stunning Elizabeth, Peter sees her mage class and advanced fire magic skill. Shocked by the display of fire magic, Joan looks at the pair of leaders who are desperately holding onto the red wand. Mages drop extremely rarely and are highly valued. They can only be obtained through a donation summon, unlike warriors, thieves, and other classes. Joan guessed that the boys had spied and began to shuffle the sticks again, while Peter explained to the disgruntled girl that they were currently busy choosing who would get the magician. And then it dawns on Elizabeth that all this time they have been treating people like things. Joan placed the toss cup on the ground for the second time and commanded fair play. Peter successfully draws the red wand, and Emma's team includes an old guard. Looking back at the screams, the guys saw Izzy trying to drag another weakling into synthesis. Peter explains to Elizabeth that the guy failed to master the support skills and now he will have to die. The mage's girlfriend is also invited to the synthesis, where she successfully increases her level. The farmer warns that it is impossible to avoid synthesis if she does not keep up, so he advises her to work hard. Ronald was the next to undergo synthesis, which also successfully increased his level. The Guardian Fairy dramatically reopened the space-time rift, inviting the second group to enter the fourth floor test. Emma kindly offered Ronald to become the main character of the fight to find out his powers. When the team left, Peter decided to ask what kind of magic the girl possessed. Elizabeth began to resist and protest that she did not want to fight some strange creatures for no reason. In a chilling voice, the irritated hero again warns that if she does not obey, she will simply be sent for synthesis and repeats his question. It turned out that the pompous girl only knew fire magic, but she said that she could easily learn support magic. The fiery beauty assured that the guy would be knocked out cold when he saw her abilities, and no support magic could compare to it. The young man was disappointed by this information but hoped that at least her magical power would be high. The happy heroes returned from the battlefield, already more united, and it was clear that they had done an excellent job of working as a team. Now the first group, under Peter's command, went into the rift. The leader suggested that they would most likely be sent to the fourth floor, which would be ideal for testing magic. He announced with a smile on his face that they would stand aside while Elizabeth fought to see her strength. Of course, such an unexpected state of affairs scared the girl a little, but she quickly pulled herself together and said that he would definitely be surprised by what he saw. As she closed the rift, sweet Izzy wished the team good luck. But at the end, a little worry was visible on her face. As soon as the heroes were transferred to the field, Peter ordered everyone to immediately prepare their weapons, as the master sent them to the 8th floor. It became clear that the master was clearly furious about what had happened earlier and the synthesis of 1 3-star. Suddenly, the chief notices something and orders everyone to lie down on the ground immediately. An absent-minded Elizabeth, who went into battle with the team for the first time, looks at her lying comrades in surprise. Suddenly, Peter grabs her and drops her down, realizing that she would not have been able to lie down on her own. At that moment, the first enemy arrow flies over their heads, almost killing the only magician. And a crowd of goblin riders whom Peter saw on reconnaissance rushes at the group with a terrible roar. Joan, reacting quickly, gets up and begins firing at the creatures. Charlie was ordered to move to the side and attack when the goblins reached them. As the leader tries to say something to Elizabeth, he notices something flying towards him. With a quick movement, he raises his shield above his head, thereby deflecting the enemy's arrow. He runs past several monsters, cutting each one in half. At some point, a wolf attacks him and Peter commands Charlie to act. With a powerful blow, the young man pierces the rider, thereby helping his leader escape from the clutches of the wolf. Peter yells at Elizabeth to start casting spells. The frightened girl replied that she needed a minute so that she could then use magic. The leader had no choice but to continue the battle, relying on the magician's powers. At this time, the fiery beauty began to cast. Magic spells began to surround her image. Charlie had to block the bolts flying at Elizabeth. Peter realized that the enemy's primary goal was to eliminate the magician. He tried to shout to the magician with a request to hit the incoming shields. But the girl was so focused on the magic that she didn't answer him. It turned out that she couldn't cast on the move, so she was in place the whole time. And that's what helped the creatures get as close as possible. A goblin's sharp blade rose above the aristocrat's head. Peter caught her in time and saved the girl from a fatal blow. He was angry because the girl cast spells without any protection. The whole team headed to run into the forest to change location. The team leader ordered the mage to start casting as soon as they reached and use magic to bombard the area. Joan notified everyone that the team could enter the previously blocked location. The slow aristocrat had to be thrown into the forest area with a strong kick. At that moment, Peter entered berserker mode for the second time that day. Even though he was tired, he had to buy time for Elizabeth. With furious blows, he scattered the riders along with the wolves, trying to dodge the fast arrows flying at him. Suddenly, a huge armored boar's carcass flashed behind the hero, running straight towards him. Having attacked the guy in the back at one moment, the wounded Peter comes out of berserker mode. He is knocked to the ground by a goblin on a beast and is already beginning to raise his spear to finish him off. In a cunning move, the young man turns under them and plunges his sword straight into the mouth of a huge wolf. He has to quickly get up and continue the fight again with many monsters around him. Elizabeth finally finishes preparing and Joan shouts at Peter to run to them. Then, with the last of his strength, the hero skillfully throws most of the creatures away from himself. With a decisive dash, he reaches the edge of the forest, and in the air above him there are already several enemies ready to tear apart. At that moment, a fiery hurricane emanating from Elizabeth sweeps across the entire field. The flames consume everything in their path. Monsters are instantly reduced to ashes by a huge burning stream. Joan and Charlie were frozen in place by the power of magic, watching the fiery carnage. Peter ordered them to help with the remaining creatures to end the battle quickly. The intense battle continued. Peter was at the limit of his abilities. Without further ado, Joan rushed to help their leader, shooting right into the enemy's head, thus saving the guy. A daring Charlie quickly pierced the creature attacking Peter. The Trinity dealt together with the annoying horde, which never ended. At this time, Elizabeth had almost finished casting, and there was little time left before the powerful magic would come out. Joan, seeing that the field would soon be covered by a wave of fire, began shouting at the boys to run away quickly. Peter and Charlie immediately took off running away from the blast wave, with the enemies still running after them. Literally a couple of moments later, the fiery explosion that the mage had caused began to incinerate the monsters. The commander immediately realized that he could not escape and immediately grouped himself, covering himself with a shield for protection. And again, tenacious goblin riders jumped out of the wall of flame. But Elizabeth cast the spell again, and the fire began to destroy the creatures with a stronger blow. A powerful hurricane, burning everything in its path, swept across the entire battlefield. The shock wave was so powerful that it almost knocked over poor Joan, who barely managed to grab onto a tree. As soon as it ended, Peter saw a huge crater. It was burning, and acrid black smoke was flying into the sky. But all the enemies were destroyed. At this moment, the entire team is moved to the waiting room, as they have successfully completed the task. The young blonde man looked in horror at the mage, who had just single-handedly destroyed over 20 goblin riders at once, while Joan admired the girl's skill. Elizabeth proudly reminded them that she had promised to surprise them, and then announced that she had the soul of the Witch of Rivell. After these words, blood gushed from her nose like a river and she fell unconscious. Peter looked at this creature and made conclusions based on her fight. It turned out that she could not use any magic for a minute while casting, which is why she would have to be protected. The girl does not have access to support magic, and her strength, endurance, and agility are at the level of a 1-star character. But the leader has never met such a strong magician. The group of heroes, pleased with their victory, emerged from the rift, helping the exhausted mage reach his resting place. The next day, the first thing the master did was build a magical center, which included 2 laboratories and a library. In the training arena, Peter trained the newly minted magician from early morning, forcing the capricious person to exercise his endurance. Peter commanded the already tired Elizabeth to speed up, because such training is very necessary for fighting with swords and spears, which she will have to dodge in battle. The guy noticed that the clothes she was wearing were much more practical than that long dress, to which the beauty objected, because this dress was a custom-made magical garment from her family that increased the power of fire. The leader gave the already exhausted aristocrat another task for each day: to run 3 laps without weights at low speed, which was considered quite easy. But the girl herself clearly had a different opinion. Peter knew they were very lucky to have the mage when they were so close to the 10th floor. Thanks to the Israelt mines that opened yesterday, the heroes managed to loot all the materials from the 3 weekly dungeons, and it's time to craft potions. The young man asked Joan to keep an eye on the aristocrat so that she would not run away from training, and he himself went to the magic hall. Making potions is usually something that high-level pharmacists or alchemists do, but Peter had already easily completed the equipment-making minigame himself, so he was confident that he could handle this as well. There were many books there, which, unfortunately, he could not read. The team leader decided to try to create potions without them. The rhythm game was again simple, and he mastered it masterfully. Having achieved great success, the black-haired man created 6 healing potions and 2 magical ones. That evening, the commander gathered Joan and Charlie in one of the empty living rooms. The guy said that there was now a fire mage in their group and pointed to the brazier next to them. At that moment, he suddenly thrust his hands into the burning coals and ordered the boys to watch his actions. Peter explained that because Elizabeth uses flame, the team must get used to it. His comrades looked at this torture with horror, but he only counted, leaving his hand in the brazier. When the 10 seconds passed, the leader pulled out his completely burned hand. The burn immediately began to disappear, and the skin began to heal. Peter calmly conveyed to the boys his idea that the heroes would have to fight alongside fire magic, and if they didn't get used to it, they could burn alive. So they needed to acquire the skill of fire resistance. Joan exclaimed in horror. Would they really have to repeat after him and put their hand in the coals? The blonde, with fear in his eyes, began to stretch out his hand towards the scorching flame. Peter immediately stopped the young man, saying that he did not want to listen and watch people screaming in agony, so he would have to practice in solitude. Joan said she didn't want to do such madness, but Peter decided to help her a little by grabbing her hand to fry, reassuring her that it wouldn't hurt. The leader began to explain that because Elizabeth couldn't use shields or teleportation magic, they themselves had to protect her, so they had to get used to fire in order to be able to save the only mage from death. Joan clearly got the lesson. The commander quickly let go of her and took the dagger, leaning his hand against the wall. He pierced her with the blade, saying with a crazy smile that Charlie would have to master one more skill: resistance to pain. He gave permission to use any method that suited him, which would allow him to endure and withstand the pain. Healing potions can heal wounds, but they come with terrible pain, so the resistance skill will be necessary for heroes. Joan didn't need to acquire this skill yet. Right now, it was more important for her to acquire the ability to switch from a dagger to arrows, which she should use at any time, at different distances. The leader announced that the team would no longer resort to a melee, ranged, and mid-range formation, and would instead use a triangular formation with the mage in the center. Peter warned that the girl would also have to join the magician's defense. This is reminiscent of the princess's defense, however. In order to use Elizabeth to the maximum, there are no other options. It is more effective to have 2 mages, one of whom has support magic, but they do not have it. Peter left his comrades and went to his room, thinking about the upcoming 9th floor. Most likely they will send a second group so that they can gain more experience. He knew that there was a mission on the 10th floor that involved at least 2 groups, as this joint mission had a danger level that was incompatible with what the heroes had seen before. The leader prepared a brazier, placed a bucket of water next to it, and lit a fire. His arduous training began, thanks to which he was able to obtain the skill of fire resistance. Afterwards, Peter decided to return to the training arena, where he directly told Elizabeth that she was useless now. So if she reduced her attack power, she would need to speed up her spell casting and reduce her mana consumption. Now the offended magician walked with an angry gait to the magic hall for training. She possessed the 3rd class of magic, where the first is ignition, the second is a flaring flame, and the third is directed explosions and their variations. The higher the class, the more mana is consumed. Although her magic was strong, but it is necessary to increase the burn rate for effective use. Peter invited Joan to train with him, and during their battle he thought about how they were approaching the 10th floor, which would make their training more difficult. Usually in sparring, arrows just fly at him, but now he threw away the shield and added additional conditions. Capable Joan has learned to use switching, and has acquired the skills of basic fencing and basic swordsmanship. Her potential is very great, and the speed of learning is generally abnormal. Thanks to the rigorous training, the guy acquired the skill of protection from projectiles. Charlie could be called a typical 1-star. He wielded a spear at the 3rd level, which was his ceiling. The young man did not appear at training for some time, locking himself in a room and trying to master pain immunity. Elizabeth, as she was told, trained on a special training ground in the magic hall. Even holding back, she was strong. In the corner of the training hall, some random 1-stars are straining, but there are no useful ones among them. There was a chance that some of them would be added to the groups because there were no more summons, and the teams needed to be assembled. The next day, Emma's group returned from completing the 9th floor. The team was exhausted. Peter found out from the commander of the second group what the difficulty was, and it turned out that they had to subdue about 50 goblins. She said that she could only notice that the soil was muddy, as if it had been raining for a long time. Of course, there was little information. It was the first group's turn to go fight, and they did so quickly thanks to the mage. Apparently, they can't use the 4th floor for training anymore. Now leader is level 10, Joan is level 8, Charlie is level 6, and Elizabeth is level 4. The heroes have risen as much as the number of floors allows them at the moment. The equipment production works in such a way that the group's equipment was upgraded from leather to iron, and Charlie got daggers. 2 of the guys training on the court joined the 1st and 2nd groups. Although they are far behind, nothing can be done. After some time, Peter, who was sitting at the table and making a battle plan, was overtaken by Izzy, who curiously asked if he guessed what awaits the team on the 10th floor. The young man recalled that, being a master of Leo's masters, it took him 2 years to reach the 88th floor. Dozens of groups were destroyed due to the unpredictability of the game elements and traps. The guy understood that his death would be a failure for the heroes and the master of anything. After a while, both teams were assembled in the square, but the master was in no hurry, deciding whether to send them to the difficult floor or wait a little longer. Peter hoped that if they were left for another week to level up, especially since there were newcomers on the teams, then they would easily pass the 10th floor. However, the master decided to do things his way and send the heroes into battle. Izzy, as always, masterfully opened the rift, inviting both teams inside. The leader warned the new blonde to hide somewhere while they fought, as his skills were completely insufficient for such a difficult level. An announcement popped up that the heroes were going on an important mission that required the participation of 2 groups, and advice appeared that in missions that use tactical stations, the player can set tactical tasks for the participating characters. Peter immediately realized that the master had no idea what to do next, and ordered Izzy to send him advice on getting things from the vault that could help in the fight. The boy divided 6 healing potions into 2 groups. Elizabeth had her own separate magic potions. The commander-in-chief warned Emma that they would most likely be separated into different locations, so they would need to group together in such a way as to advance towards the center. After these words, the entire team was moved to the floor. The boys immediately saw a poor man, panicking, sitting on the road. It turned out that he does not see or hear them, but the heroes can touch him, and the NPCs feel his touch. The leader told the others that there are many cases when NPCs appear on missions. Interaction with them, although lagging, is how it is done. Having looked around the city, Peter found it familiar. The guys also felt that they had been here before and were right, because this was the same city from the 5th floor, but not yet destroyed. Joan was confused, because the time frame seemed very strange to her. But the black-haired young man said that this was not the only anomaly, and they should focus on something else. The leader ordered the group to scout the area in 5 minutes, as they were clearly given time before the battle itself. The leader climbed to the highest tower to see all the useful information from it. There were thousands of goblins in the northern forest. Assault ladders were visible. Fortunately, there were no battering rams anywhere. In the east, there was a river, which they met on the 7th floor, and again, many enemies without siege mechanisms. The human forces gathered outside the castle were less than half of the enemy. Rather, their ratio was 10 to 1, if not more. Obviously, the worst scenario could not be imagined. Given the task of surviving for a certain amount of time, they will pass this floor with greater ease than the 5th one in its time. There were plenty of NPCs here that could be used as bait, and they also have a mage focused on defending the territory. Suddenly, a triple alert sounded, indicating the highest difficulty. It turned out that this mission was not about survival, but about defense. By combining the first group with the second, we get only 10 people. Taking into account 3,500 NPCs, we get about 360 soldiers who must stand against thousands of goblins. The heroes began to share their findings, with Joan leading the way, unsuccessfully trying to talk to the residents who couldn't even hear her. Charlie told of refugees heading to the city center, goblins approaching from the north and east gates, and no exits to the south and west, nor any escape routes respectively. The hero's mission was to defend the city and prevent the enemy from breaking through the gates, in other words, to destroy the opponents. Ronald shared the idea of retreat, because by leaving the city they would be able to monitor the situation and carry out guerrilla raids, to which Peter firmly refused. Their leader suspected that the conditions for the successful completion of the mission were the destruction of the invading army, otherwise they would fail. Suddenly, someone shouted at him to turn to the tower, because the statue next to it began to glow. Twin Goddesses is an item that appears from time to time on special missions. If this statue is destroyed, all the heroes will instantly die, regardless of whether they kill the goblins or not. A plan was needed, as there were many goblins, but the only siege weapons they had were ladders, and only the army in the north, which meant that if the groups were careful, they could buy themselves enough time. Having made his decision, Peter commanded Emma's group to head to the north wall and help the soldiers, doing everything possible to destroy the ladders that would cling to the castle walls. The girl was excited by the fact that there would be only 5 of them, because such an increase to the existing 300 would make it possible to protect the city. The leader understood why she was thinking like that. But if you count the strength of the second group, it will be about 50 soldiers. While the goblins have no other equipment except assault ladders, they only need to hold their positions on the walls in the most dangerous place, thanks to which the effectiveness of the defense will increase several times. If both groups fight together, the result will be the same. Yes, they will be able to hold out a little longer, but in the end, the goblins will still break through. The numerical difference is too great. Peter reminded the boys that there was a river in the east, and that perhaps there was a key to the mystery. On the 7th floor, it was raining cats and dogs, and the dam had burst. All the clues from the 5th to the 9th floor pointed to the dam. The question was how it was connected to the goblins. Suddenly, Joan shouts out that she remembered hearing a horse gallop near the river on the 7th floor. The boy began to tug at her cheek, scolding her for not telling him about it sooner. But the reason she hadn't done it sooner was because she wasn't sure what she had heard. The leader commanded Emma that her group should buy as much time as possible. If the outer wall fell, then they should move to the inner one, and if necessary use soldiers and refugees as bait. No matter how hard it was for them, they should hold out until the first group returned. The guy ordered his team to take up arms and go to the eastern gate to leave the city. If the sound Joan heard was reinforcements, then the reason the city fell on the 5th floor was because the help simply couldn't get across the riverbed due to the dam breaking. The second team was required to reach the east bank and kill the goblins, while the first group was to protect the dam from breaking through. The crowd of refugees moved into the inner walls. The heroes barely squeezed through these people, but this was only the beginning, because the real problem was waiting for them ahead. They ran to the gates that lead outside. Joan had to climb up and scout out the situation, and Charlie prepared for the gates to open. Elizabeth needed to start casting a spell, because when the gates opened, she would have to attack the goblins with fire. As soon as the blonde man began to pull the mechanism to open the gate, the soldiers immediately jumped up to stop the invisible evil spirits. The girl transmitted information from above that there were a lot of goblins gathered on the other side, and if the gates were opened, they could simply trample them. It didn't matter anymore. Elizabeth's magic was almost ready to attack, and the gates were about to open. At the moment when a small gap appeared, the first arrow of the enemy flew through it. Peter, of course, managed to stop her, protecting the magician. Joan had to deal with soldiers who were preventing the gate from opening. The rain that had started made the leader doubt the power of fire magic in such weather conditions. It was Elizabeth's time, her magic already at the ready, and the goblins were eager to destroy her. In an instant, all the nasty monsters were incinerated by the terrible power of fire. The flames burst through the outer gates, destroying everyone nearby. The mage needed to drink a magic potion every time after using magic to replenish the mana he had spent. Suddenly, the young man saw a newcomer who was scared to death and couldn't even say a word. He sent him to Emma, who would come up with a task for him, and if he survived, he would receive recognition from the chieftain himself. The soldiers began to close the gates in a hurry. Peter was the last one to come out. Now the path to retreat was cut off. All that was left was to go forward. The team took up positions, Elizabeth concentrating on weak firepower, spreading her flames over the maximum area. The rain was getting heavier, and the enemies were starting to advance, with 20 seconds left until the spell was cast. Peter deftly deflected the projectiles flying at the magician with his shield. Charlie boldly pierced through the carcasses of the creatures. Joan pierced the monsters' skulls with each well-aimed shot. And when the moment came, the magical flame spread with a powerful blow. The team ran right through the line of fire until the monsters attacked again. Although the heat penetrated the armor, it was quite bearable. The only thing is that because of the rain, the fire barricade went out too quickly. The bloody battle continued again, and the countdown to the next salvo began. And a few moments later, Elizabeth again mercilessly burned the vile creatures. Peter commanded them to move forward, using the flame as a shield, repeating this until they reached the river. At the other end of the enemy horde was the goblin commander-in-chief, who ordered his soldiers to change tactics. The hero leader ordered to advance again after the mage's attack. However, he noticed that the tactics of these pigs had changed. They immediately went on the offensive after using magic. Peter cut down the bastards one by one with quick and precise movements of his sword. He saw the leader of the creatures behind the crowd, who was the culprit of the celebration. The freak knew that there was a delay between the magician's attacks, so they did not stop the raids. Then the leader said that they had only one chance to avoid failure. They needed to tear the main goblin into 1,000 little pieces. The crowd moved aggressively towards the team. Their target was the mage, whom they were obliged to kill first. While Elizabeth was casting her spell, the heroes fought and actively protected her. And when the magic was ready to break out, the girl released it without thinking. With a powerful battering ram, the flames swept away the vile pigs and paved the way straight to their commander-in-chief. One volley was not enough. Then an explosion sounded, which blew away another batch of bastards. Joan concentrated and shot their commander straight in the head. He instantly fell dead. Exhausted, Elizabeth began to lose consciousness due to fatigue. The leader caught her in time. He understood that, although the magic was strong, it was impossible to kill everyone. Due to the loss of their commander, the goblins were apparently afraid to engage the group again and headed towards the fortress, their original goal. Having already moved a decent distance, they were of no interest to the goblins who went to the wall. The team was wildly tired and caught their breath. Peter explained how to use healing potions correctly, and everyone followed suit. It was visible from afar that the northern wall was under siege. The outer wall was still standing, which indicated a clear breakthrough by Emma's group. The heroes approached the dam with the full understanding that this was only the beginning. The persistent goblins began to approach them again. However, this time they brought a big friend, an ogre. The chieftain urgently began to distribute roles, the magician to create a wall to stop the goblins, Charlie to protect Elizabeth. Peter took on a huge ogre. If he misses even one blow, he can carry the coffin. The shield will not help in any way against such unrivaled power. The hero decided to choose a forward attack because there were no other options. With its terrible blows, the monster forced the young man to quickly dodge and jump far away. Joan tried to pierce his thick skin with arrows, but all attempts were in vain. The freak does not dodge because he does not need to. Only blows to weak spots can harm him. While the battle was going on, another ogre appeared behind the wall of fire. Peter tried to find help, but Charlie was up to his ears in goblins, as was Elizabeth. The guy had to take risks again and approached the huge monster. Ignoring all the pain, he furiously aimed his sword for a critical strike. With a cruel grin on his face, he struck the weak spot of the no longer quite male ogre. Unable to bear such a vile step from its rival, the creature became angry and prepared to destroy everything in its path. With a momentary leap, the hero jumped onto the enemy's shoulders and pierced his skull with all his might. And with an additional blow, he finally finishes off the enemy. The giant falls to the fiery land, subdued by the little man. The second degenerate headed straight for Elizabeth. Joan immediately tried to distract him by shooting him with her bow, but he didn't notice anything and had already come close to the magician. Suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, he pushes her out of his way and moves on. Things turned out to be even worse because he was on his way to break the dam. Joan was ordered to stop him, and she quickly climbed onto his back. With a merciless attack of the dagger, the girl pierces his thick skin. Peter instantly flew to the rescue, damaging the ogre. This was enough to send the large carcass falling into the river. However, with his last breath, the bastard stuck his paw out of the water to finish what he started. With a roar, the dam collapses under the powerful impact and the water breaks through. It was a failure because there should have been reinforcements behind the dam, judging by the clues, who would no longer be able to cross to the other bank. The disappointed young man said that they would have to go back and come up with a new plan. He was suddenly stopped by Elizabeth, who wanted to show him something. Suddenly, a purple magical light began to surround her, and she used a previously unknown technique. With this force, she lifted the huge block upward, moved into the breach, which helped save the mission. Peter, shocked, had just learned that his friend had telekinesis and didn't even know how to react. Now all they had to do was fight and destroy their enemies. The goblins are back again, but with reinforcements. The leader began to worry because quite a bit of time had passed since the floor was launched, but there was still no sign of help coming. Elizabeth had to drink the last of the magic potions, and when she was distracted by drinking, the girl was suddenly attacked by a goblin. At the same moment, a horseman with a lion's head appears on a horse. The goblin is cut into two pieces with one blow, thereby saving the aristocrat. It turned out that the Iron Lion cavalry came to the rescue. The hungry eyes of the monsters turned their gaze to new victims, and they rushed into battle. A horde of soldiers in iron armor burst out of the forest. There are about 500 horsemen in the cavalry. The heroes are still in the minority, but those who have arrived are much stronger than the ordinary soldiers guarding the city. Peter saw a couple of freed horses and suggested riding to the fortress. Because he did not know how to ride, he asked the master for a book of skills, horse riding. The hero cannot learn skills that are not directly related to combat, but he can gain basic ones in this way, which is what he did. Peter and Elizabeth mounted one horse, and Charlie and Joan mounted the other and set off towards the wall. The greatest danger lies in the north, where they are besieging with ladders, but the cavalry also understands this, so that is where they went. Having analyzed the situation, the head came to the decision to go their separate ways. The team had to retreat to a safe distance from the battle and move towards the forest. Just as they approached the thicket, the rain stopped. Seeing goblin riders ambush them from the forest, the team decided to try to stop them with magic. The worst horror took place near the city walls where goblins had gathered. The terrible ogres had already begun to approach, preparing to destroy everything and everyone. Peter explained to the heroes that it would be bad if the wolf riders entered the battle. The cavalry alone would not be able to withstand such an attack. Elizabeth was ordered to focus on area of effect instead of force so that the team could get through the forest. Meanwhile, goblins were actively trying to climb the walls using ladders. The young hero fought bravely against the enemy, even though he had little experience, until he began to be dragged away by the falling goblin. But Emma intervened in time and saved the boy's life. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, the girl noticed unusual people on the battlefield. These were their saviors, the brave cavalry of Iron Lions. They fought their enemies fiercely and skillfully, leaving behind only bloody corpses. She reassured the newcomer that reinforcements had already arrived, which meant victory was approaching. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was furiously burning the creatures in the forest. They burned in their lair with a furious roar. It became clear from her that if she called upon magic again, her reserves would burn out. So for now, her role was ending. The group saddled their horses and rode away from the cleared territory of the monsters. The defense continued. About 100 soldiers survived on the northern wall. Many of the city's defenders died before the cavalry arrived. Half of the reinforcements fell under the onslaught of the ogres. And then the battle went against the remaining goblin riders who joined later. If Elizabeth hadn't lit the fire, the cavalry would have been destroyed too. The horsemen's abilities are astonishing, their qualitative advantage more than compensated for their lack of numbers. Cries of victory echoed throughout the battlefield. The second group on the wall also rejoiced at their victory over their enemies. A satisfied Peter, along with the heroes, was glad that he had not received a single notification that someone had gone into the arms of the goddess. They were clearly different from those that were on the 5th floor. Suddenly, the leader became wary, because for some reason they were not being returned back. They killed all the monsters, but the message about the cleansing never appeared. Suddenly, a loading board appeared on the screen. Then a notification about recovery. Everything around became like a computer bug. Everything froze. An error appeared disconnecting from the server. In this house, someone whispered to Peter to turn around, and he saw a scary demon of level 999. The hero immediately remembered how this very creature killed his team and dragged them into the game by force. The guy's eyes lit up with a thirst for revenge on the bastard for his terrible actions. But the dark apostle who appeared next to him suddenly said that he would wait for him. After this, the demon evaporated, and the apostle began to slowly walk away and disappeared into the fire. A message appeared indicating that the recovery was complete and the connection to the server was reconnected. Joan asked excitedly about what had happened and was concerned about Peter's condition. The commander immediately shouted for everyone to move to the castle immediately. They ran to the gate as fast as they could because the boy knew that nothing was over yet. There has never been any information before that a dark apostle could appear on the lower floors. His terrible ability is to resurrect the dead. In an instant, the dead battlefield turned into an uprising of the mad undead. Apostles can raise corpses that meet certain conditions, and zombies will attack until their skulls are split open. In any case, this is not the monster that should appear on the 10th floor. Meanwhile, the group of heroes is already entering the gate. Peter left the team outside the gates, ordering them to protect the goddess statue along with Elizabeth. The boys only had to hold out until he returned, and the young man himself prepared for a solo battle. Although the zombies look terribly disgusting, it shouldn't be difficult, so the guy decided to deal with them one by one. Having driven a decent distance, the leader saw that the huge ogre had also risen and was trying to break through the gate with powerful blows. Peter was assisted by Joan, who shot at the enemies attacking him from behind. After a few blows, the gates were broken and all the residents and soldiers fell into panic. A multitude of creatures appeared before their eyes. It was a terrible sight. Peter only needed to get rid of the apostle. He disappeared into the forest among the lights. That's where he was waiting for him. The leader decided for himself that he would kill this monster at any cost. Emma's leadership skills are much better than he expected. Even in such a critical situation, she makes balanced decisions. They needed to concentrate on protecting the goddess statue. If the outer wall falls, they will have to devote all their strength to defending the inner one. If Charlie and Joan use their experience gained from the 5th floor, they will hold out longer. The residents, scared to death, pushed each other, trying to escape from the monsters. Crowded at the gate, they begged to be let in and not condemned to death. Peter, in turn, wondered how long it would take to kill the Dark Disciple. Thanks to today's battle, he obtained the Fire Resistance Skill Level 2. Covering his nose from the smoke with his hand, he skillfully fought with the forest creatures. Coming to the end of the map, he realized that an apostle was waiting for him here. Notifications arrived about the death of 2 newcomers, about Emma's injury, and Duke's fear. The apostle suddenly said that he wanted to talk. But for Peter, the time for conversations had long passed and he began the attack. The guy didn't wait and immediately went into berserker mode. Daggers flew at the dark student, who in turn began to launch magical projectiles. Several of them hit the guy's body, but despite the wild pain, he did not stop his attack. And a moment later, he mercilessly tore his enemy to pieces. Pierced through and without an arm, he looked at the apostle who had fallen at his feet. Soon he was sitting under a tree, bleeding and waiting for the message to clear the floor. Peter assumed that he would rather die than have the statue of the goddess destroyed. At the other end of the map, the heroes were busily destroying monsters. Unfortunately, not all of them were able to withstand the enemy onslaught, but most of them fought with all their might to defend the statue. At some point, the now golden statue of the goddess began to glow with a blue light. Peter, sitting on the ground, barely alive, began to disappear in the light of the movement. The floor was cleared, all the heroes were able to level up. Thanks to this mission, they received a basic fire element stone. A notification popped up that evolution was available to one of the heroes. Thanks to the unification of stones and the collection of all the necessary materials, a fragment of memory will be available to the master, and adventure dungeons have also become available. The next day, in the evening, Peter woke up in his bed, realizing that everything was fine with him. He decided to check on the others. Entering the dining room, he noticed Charlie with a very worried look on his face. Charlie breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the leader alive. The commander asked what thoughts had put him in an anxious state. It turned out that he was thinking about the meaning of their battle. Because when Peter went beyond the walls, corpses invaded the city and many NPCs died. The young man was apparently too nervous, so he went to bed. After a while, a variety of amazing dishes appeared on the table. Joan admired the overly fancy presentation, to which Chloe explained that Peter had asked for the best dishes to be prepared from the ingredients available. Most of the guys were fine after yesterday, but Duke clearly needed some recovery. When the master entered the game, the first thing he did was to add the hero's ascension room to the synthesis hall. He began synthesizing items to obtain the exaltation stone. A pleased Izzy flew to Peter as quickly as possible to congratulate him on his promotion. She handed him the stone and wished him to quickly reach the 7th star and conquer the tower. The young man remembered how much effort he had put into this crap to get a 7-star character. He assumed that there must be some special conditions for this. The hero moved towards the stairs leading to the raised hall. The master himself has no idea what is happening in this room. Only the hero himself goes through the ascension. As soon as the stone touched the panel, a beam of light illuminated the entire space, and teleportation began. Peter was transported to the living room, where the mother was rocking the baby, sitting by the window. There was a wall between them that prevented him from getting closer. The real Tim guessed that this was Peter's past, in whose guise he was now, because the guy himself had no family. He had no idea what was going on, but in order not to waste time, he went out and found himself in the lobby. A guardian fairy with a kind smile, similar to Izzy, flew towards him. However, she was smaller and could not speak, only gesturing that he needed to go into the rift. Before him appeared a huge gate with the inscription Precedence Dungeon. Its complexity was beyond the pale. The triple warning sounded, and Peter began to feel fear due to the terrible pressure. But he didn't lose his composure and instantly entered berserker mode, which helped him overcome his fear. Opposite him stood the same demon, who was clearly waiting for their meeting. Peter quickly pulled out his sword and extended it towards the enemy, wanting to kill this creature. But he understood that his level was 999, and it was almost impossible to kill him. The demon destroyed Master Leo's group in less than 10 seconds, which included 5- and 6-star heroes. The monster arrogantly asked if the boy would attack him, since he clearly hated him, to which the young man got angry and told him to send him back and not talk nonsense. The bastard applauded such self-control, because without it he would have died at the very beginning. Suddenly, the hero's head began to hurt. Did this really happen to everyone on the platform? Of course, the demon replied that he was special, and this place is a gift for him. After this phrase, long hair began to wither from the dark flesh. The material of the beginning turns into neat female legs. The real Izzy appeared before Leo, only in human form. They really did look alike, and it turned out that the guardian fairy was a duplicate of the real girl. She began to materialize some object in her hands. Throwing it into Leo's hands, the boy saw that it was the business card of the president of the Mobius Corporation, which was the founder of the game Choose Me. He was irritated by such mockery, but the sweet girl said that she had many names, which depended on the circumstances. With a cold gaze, the young man demanded that she send him back immediately if she did not want to die. Looking haughtily at some one-star hero who was threatening her, the girl said that his imagination was running wild. Stamping her foot, the beauty released dark energy in the form of an arrow straight at Leo. The spear pierced the hero's chest and touched his very heart. The girl admired the courage of the man who didn't even blink when he was almost killed. Her dark matter had dissolved, and Leo still didn't understand what she wanted from him. The girl continued to talk about how she was a fan of the unstoppable master of invisibility, the fifth in the whole world, and she got great pleasure from watching his games. It turned out that she came to him to tell him the truth of this world. History is a factor that is usually overlooked when playing games like this, as people are more interested in the content, but in fact, the history of Pick Me is quite ancient. The mysterious girl transported them to the city beginning her story. They found themselves on the continent of Taunir, the Heim Peninsula, the city of Nelsa. Despite the fact that they found this city on the 10th floor, it was completely destroyed. She continued to show different cities: Silkia, Kaya, Idora, Peonia, Midian, Icardia, Lilgia, Halzia, and many other completely destroyed places. All the continents connected to Mobius turned into this. Over 100 million worlds were destroyed in an instant. She said this with a clear hint about the destruction of Niflheimer, a book whose ending is already predetermined, and it is bad. Each character dreams of a different ending. Their goal is simply to drag the reader of the book inside. They need to correct and rewrite history. Even if the world ends up in chaos, a being from a higher dimension is able to change the cause and effect relationship with just one observation. This is the reason why Choose Me was created. After the story, the girl extended her hand to Master Leo and asked for cooperation. And at that moment, a dagger flies at her and pierces her skull. Leo was curious about what the girl would say, but everything she said turned out to be nonsense. She asked him to think carefully, but the young man had nothing to think about. He was not going to cooperate with the demon who had forcibly dragged him here and made him go through all this suffering. Having pulled the dagger out of her head, she began to approach him arrogantly, saying that she was in pain and that he was too cruel. The guy bluffed as best he could, but he couldn't kill her now, because being only a one-star hero, he couldn't do anything. So he just repeated to bring him back again. Pseudo-Izzy continued to talk about how she had to go through a lot of trouble to bring him to this place. She valued him very much compared to other masters. After all, only he has achieved such a unique achievement that no one else has, namely, Master, trust in your connection with the heroes. Suddenly, she moved them to the 80th floor, which only 5 out of hundreds of millions of players had been granted permission to complete. Leo didn't understand why she was showing him this. It was simple. The demoness wanted to watch this game scene together. I became interested in what it was like to see everything live, through the eyes of the characters, rather than watching what was happening through a screen. The 80th floor was different from the others. The task was to conquer it, but there were no specific goals. Everyone who tried to pass it had one thing in common: failure. So among the players, the floor was tacitly called the Wailing Wall. Master Leo knew how to successfully pass this floor. He did not understand why she was showing him his successful raid, to which the girl only replied that he should watch carefully and see for himself. After passing the 79th floor, he felt quite confident in anticipation of the attempted attack on the 80th, and paid for it by losing almost all of his forces, with the exception of the main group. Hell was the only word that could describe the 80th floor. Living beings could not hope to try to survive there. The shards of chaos, despair, and malice were the biggest pain in the ass of any master on this floor. It was because of them that the level was so high. The girl decided to throw a line about the fact that in Choose Me, the difficulty level depends on the master's account, as does the possibility of summoning. There was an intrigue about why Leo never got a 5-star hero. Is this just a miserable failure or an unpleasant coincidence? The reason why he didn't get the desired character was not because the master was unlucky. It was just that there were no heroes left in Niflheimer. By the way, the same thing applied to the difficulty level. His city is one of the few S rank, which is one of the worst scenarios for the master. It still remains a mystery to the mysterious girl how he managed to get to the 80th floor under such conditions. At that moment, a bright light lit up on the neighboring flying island, indicating the heroes were moving to the floor. The Fab Five were assembled and prepared for a brutal battle. They were confronted by terrible, huge monsters that had no end in sight. Suddenly, the entire board froze as the GM used the tactical outpost effect and took control of the mission map. It was shown how Master Leo set tasks and came up with tactics for his heroes. The enthusiastic Pseudo-Izzy said that the tactics were quite interesting, because capturing key points in a special order just before the army's advance is a difficult task. But the goal is simple. She asked to pay attention to the team's actions, to their attitude towards Master Leo. The heroes watched Leo's impeccable tactics with admiration. Each of them understood that they could not let down their valuable master. They began a roll call in which they swore allegiance to him. The first was Charlotte, a sweet girl with a long braid who was the king's arrow. The king's spear is Christopher, a young man with a serious look. Archie was a big, muscular guy and was the king's sword. The beautiful mage Holly was the eyes of the king. Of course, their leader Hannah is the king's flame. As soon as the oaths were over, the mission began, and a huge mass of enemies rushed towards the five. The enchanted demoness watched as they sincerely swore allegiance to the master. As the heroes climb higher and higher in the tower, they begin to realize the truth, and their hearts are gradually filled with despair, which is why the player's connection with the heroes is so important, because no one will be loyal when they are treated like a pet. Master Leo was different. He was the only one who was revered, being the true king of Niflheimer. Even now, the inhabitants of Niflheimer are desperately looking for him, because they know that he ended up here. What kind of hero in his right mind would spend months searching every corner of the world in search of a missing master? Would other masters' heroes do the same? And the girl was also very interested in the fact that there was a master who had never used synthesis, when everyone else punished the disobedient, kept the heroes under control with fear of synthesis. Leo never came across a 5-star hero. Only Hannah was with 4 stars. People said that he had a buggy account. They persuaded him to quit or create a new one. But Tim was accustomed to injustice from an early age, being a lonely child without a family. Before the guy became famous, most players used heroes literally as toys. They simply threw them away when one or another character became boring. Even if the hero had a low rank, Tim preferred not to give up on him if he showed even a little potential, knowing that a city controlled through fear was the path to fall. The girl came to the conclusion that Master Leo somehow found out that the heroes were living people, which is why he behaved like that. Tim said he noticed how the characters behaved too realistically, making it hard to believe that they were just computer-generated characters. It turns out that Leo's rule was to the girl's liking, and that's why she wanted to talk to the young man. In a rage, Tim yelled at the girl, saying that he had nothing to do with this world and everything that was happening, that he was an earthling, and that he needed to be returned home. Master Leo had practically no losses up until the 88th floor, and that very wailing wall where the top 1 player was stuck at that time, he literally had to reach out his hand to conquer the 90th floor. And it was at that moment that they dared to pull him here. The demoness continued to talk about how he could become a warrior who would save Mobius. But since he did not want to cooperate, she would calmly wait until he grew to her level. With an evil smile, she said that the Tanya he found himself in would be able to surprise him without her intervention, because this world had an S-class difficulty, just like Niflheimer. She began manipulating him by saying that no matter how good Peter was, there was a 90% chance that the master would quit the game, but that could change if she reached out. The girl began to swear on her name that she would return him home if he conquered the tower, and also transfer half of her share in the Mobius Corporation to his account. Leo asked her to never show her face again. He didn't believe a single word she said. Once again, he powerfully throws the dagger into the demon's cute face. He decided for himself that on the way to conquering the tower, he would find the answers himself and learn the truth and return himself without the help of this trash. She took his answer with understanding, saying that she would forget about his disrespect towards her, and yet the girl decides to show something once he begins his ascent. She opened access to the real prologue, Choose Me, prepared especially for him. The story began about a fertile land where people and other races coexist peacefully, Taunia. This continent lived in peace and prospered. However, the peaceful days came to an end. An unknown enemy attacked the borders of states. The earth drowned in rivers of blood released by dark forces. But even in these times filled with despair and madness, people have one hope: the Master. On this path, Many heroes will stand shoulder to shoulder with you, believe in their loyalty and in your friendship with them, because the future is in your hands. The path will be blocked by countless enemies. Many of them hiding in hidden lands are so powerful that it is difficult to imagine. When the story ended, the doors opened back. The girl wished him luck in conquering the tower, and Leo headed into the hall. The master received a congratulation about the awakening of the hero's forgotten memories. Peter successfully passed the process of increasing his stardom. Now he is a 2-star hero. The level restriction has been removed and skills have been improved. When the boss returned to the team, he warned Charlie that he too would soon be promoted. Peter looked at the boy and saw his little sister, the reason he would fight and strive to get out. Leo promised himself that he would definitely take revenge on the demon who arranged all this. The next day, when anything entered the game, a message appeared apologizing to all masters for not having access to the game for some time. All players on the lower floors of the tower experienced a disconnection, so the Mobius representatives issued an explanatory notice. But Leo was sure that what happened was related to the appearance of a demon with an apostle on the 10th floor. Compensation was given for the glitch, which included 500 gems, 50,000 gold, 1 gift ticket to improve your relationship with heroes, and a 3-day lift of restrictions on visiting weekly dungeons. A happy Izzy rushed to congratulate Leo, but he quickly stopped her joy when he announced that he had met her main body. The fairy was shocked by this news, not understanding how this happened. The hero only asked her for help in climbing the tower. Izzy, of course, agreed, and also handed him the ticket that the master had given him so that he could buy something for himself. A gift is something that a player can give to a hero. If he has done something that he liked, its value can vary. Leo contemptuously handed back the ticket he had been given, telling them to give it to someone else. He explained to the worried custodian that the items he wanted to buy cost more than 10,000. However, the master decided to please Peter himself by purchasing a warhorse figurine with the gift ticket. As soon as he had her in his hands, he mercilessly threw her to the ground, because it is unfair to give gifts to only one hero when you have many other worthy characters. Looking at the broken statuette, the farmer said that different heroes want different gifts, and giving them just anything is nonsense. He fondly recalled that at one time, Master Leo remembered the hobbies of each of his top 100 heroes in Niflheimer. Unexpectedly, Anything decided to call upon the heroes of the first squad for a mission. The master clearly rushed into making a decision. Since Elizabeth was on the verge of nervous exhaustion due to the incessant training, a good master would have taken care of his heroes first. In front of the team were gates to the 11th floor. The guys were not happy with this news. Joan became worried that they were being sent to the next floor so soon. Peter realized that their master was suffering from the common "God, I'm so good" delusion among players, a disease that makes players think that their smart decisions are what wins missions and gets them through floors. Ideally, he should have been allowed to farm the lower floors and only then sent to 11, but now it became clear that he doesn't understand a damn thing about this game. The heroes were met by skeletons that were climbing out of graves in the cemetery. Peter ordered the team to get ready and get into position. One of the reasons Pick Me was called a cheap RNG crap game was because the difficulty on the lower floors of the tower was completely random. If you're lucky, you'll get a good hero and be able to get through the starting floors without any problems. But if you get slag, you'll suffer even on the easiest missions. While the leader fought, thinking about the player, the team bravely fought against a new type of enemy. Elizabeth, despite being exhausted, successfully used her magic spells. Peter noticed that the master's thinking developed in much the same way as his own had in his time. The changes occurred after conquering the 5th floor. His thinking began to go wrong. He made 5 donation calls in a row without properly preparing the conditions for this. Then he threw heroes who were not fully developed to the 10th floor. He made many mistakes. After successfully completing the floor, Peter decided to call Izzy. He wanted to find out something from her. Unfortunately, the fairy could not reveal many secrets, being limited in her abilities. But for her beloved Master Leo, she was ready to make an exception. The first question was about the name of the girl director. Since she had about 100 million names, the keeper could not immediately answer the question. But after thinking, she said that for the world of Tanya, her name would be Terra. After conquering the 10th floor, the name of the hero's base city changes depending on the master. Here it is Tanya. For Master Leo, it is Niflheimer. For other players, it is different. The next question was what Mobius was, but Izzy just calmly replied that it was a company. Peter clarified that he meant a deeper meaning, and it turned out that this was a spiral universe, connected in parallel to many worlds. Master Leo felt like he was beginning to slowly understand what this Terra was. The hero asked if the person, anything, was real, to which the fairy answered in the affirmative, because only an earthling can become a master. After slightly correcting his question, the guy asked about the connection between the player and Terra, which greatly excited Izzy. The fairy instantly disappeared to find out such provocative information. The joyful keeper returned after a while, announcing that another director, assuring her that they were not related. She assured him that doing something like this at the initial stages is only possible in extreme circumstances, and that such an action entails a lot of risks. A little later at training, Peter reflected on the fact that he had not made a mistake, and their master was a classic player with the disease. I carry everything lightly. God, how good I am. How powerful my arms are. If the symptoms worsen, this will lead to serious problems in the near future. By taking the right measures against this, the heroes will have a chance to return him to normal. One of the best ways to cure a master's star disease is to sober him up by removing the ability to use the main heroes he relies on the most. After a while, the master entered the game and first of all called Peter's group. The guys were excited about such a quick rise through the floors. Izzy once again spectacularly opened the rift of space and time for the heroes. The captain suddenly stopped and called the fairy to find out which floor they were heading to. After he found out it would be 12, he refused to participate in the raid. The team began to worry about whether this could be done and whether everything would be okay in the future. Izzy tried to convey to him that such impudence could enrage the master and he would send him to synthesis, which he would no longer be able to refuse. The heroes stood in a stupor for some time from the information they received, because it completely changed the course of the case. Soon the entire group refused to participate, for which the master could listen to their demands or punish the leader. The master could not even imagine that the heroes could disobey his orders. Unexpectedly, Izzy called the second team to the square. Emma asked why they didn't go to the floor, to which Peter calmly replied that they refused. The commander of the second squad warned the guy that it could be very dangerous if he did not show his usefulness. The team gathered together to discuss whether to go into battle or risk the fusion. After thinking for a while, they decided that they needed to become stronger and the guys would go fight. Peter warned Joan that if he was synthesized, they should never disobey the master's orders because that way they could survive. However, the entire team unanimously declared that they did not believe in the death of the chief. Suddenly, terribly exhausted, wounded heroes began to emerge from the rift, clearly disappointed in the master's actions. Emma asked Peter to show her how to properly disobey an order. The satisfied young man said that it was very simple and told how to do it, after which Emma refuses to participate and the entire team number 2 is out of the master's control. The boss's plan worked. The master can no longer complete the main dungeons, the exploration dungeons are no longer accessible, and the lobby is frozen. Even though they refused to follow the master's orders, the heroes needed to act as usual, so the commander ordered them to continue training. Peter has already come up with something they can do, namely visit the weekly dungeons where they can be on their own. He didn't care if the master abandoned the game or synthesized Leo, because it was better to die without pain than to bust his ass in the dungeon. Moreover, the death of the leader, although it will raise the stress level of the heroes, can be easily solved with the right approach, if, of course, the master has enough brains. The next day, the first group went into the weekly dungeon. To complete 2 different dungeons, the team split up. Elizabeth stayed with Peter, while Joan and Charlie stayed together. They were able to obtain the base stone of the fire element. After that, the heroes continued to train, and the leader's sword and shield skills reached level 6. Elizabeth was given the task of training telekinesis until she acquired the appropriate skill, which the fire mage was not very happy about. That day, the master did not log into the game, as well as for several days in a row. But when he finally deigned to come in, Izzy cried with joy. Emma assumed anything had thought about his actions, but Peter didn't think so, because the "aren't I good" syndrome doesn't heal that quickly. The master decided to spend 1,500 gems on a summoning. The first one he got was the 3-star knight Bertrand. The second was a hot bitch, Samantha, also with 3 stars. The last one to fall was an old man, Mason, as rare as the first 2. Emma noted that if the situation was the same as with Elizabeth and Robert, then they would have to choose again. But Peter stopped her, saying that none of them would join the teams. As soon as the new heroes came out onto the square, they began to quarrel terribly among themselves. Just as the fight was about to begin between Samantha and an enraged Mason, the commander slowly walked towards them. As soon as the knight saw him, he immediately ran to him for help, because they did not listen to him at all. The sarcastic Samantha took up the taunt about the brat who was just lucky enough to be born into a rich family. She had no intention of listening to his orders. Now the young knight could not stand the insult to his family and rushed into battle. Emma asked why they hated each other so immediately, and the chief suggested that they were simply incompatible. Only a formidable little fairy was able to stop the fight. Izzy explained that heroes are forbidden to fight among themselves, especially in the lobby. The hot girl, realizing that they needed to form a team, immediately pointed her sword at Peter and expressed a desire to be in his group. The keeper explained that they were not allowed to choose their own teams, after which the master decided to unite the completely incompatible trio together and sent them to the floor. After such a show, the boss decided to go to bed, because there would be nothing interesting anymore. Upon entering the room, notifications poured in one after another, indicating that the trio had started fighting among themselves. No matter how hard Peter tried to sleep, he couldn't do it because of the loud announcements. Everything calmed down when the announcement of the death of the entire team surfaced. Izzy instantly appeared in front of him, all in tears. She rushed at him in panic when the master abruptly left the game. The fairy was hysterical, telling that the account is deleted if the master does not log in for 6 months. The poor keeper was in tears, thinking how she would be deprived of power, how she would dissolve. Leo began to calm the drama queen down by saying that they didn't know whether the master would leave for good or not. When the boy found out that Izzy would die if he didn't climb the tower, he started to worry. However, the next day, the master logged into the game and bought a triple gold pack containing 5,000 diamonds and 3 gift cards. This news caught the heroes in the training arena. The master decided to start an advanced summoning of 3 characters at once. The first one to come out was a cheeky blonde guy named Maxwell. A bearded man named Norwood was called after him. The last hero to be summoned was a young archer, Albie. Peter met the heroes and immediately ordered them to go to the training ground. He asked Emma to be on standby. Joan noticed that Peter's behavior was much more delicate than when Adam's group appeared, where Emma had been before. Suddenly, the impudent Maxwell attacked Peter from behind. The young man turned around in an instant and hit the guy in the face several times to calm his ardor. Emma took over Albie's express training by starting a fight with him. While they were busily engaged with the 2 recruits, Norwood stood to the side in horror, not knowing what to do with himself. The master created a group of 3 newcomers and 2 more 1-stars, after which the quick training ended. The heroes were called to the rift, and they set out to conquer the floor. After their return, one of them was badly wounded, but they passed the test. Since the master decided to give a ticket, it means the newcomers have learned their roles well. A few days later, while training, Joan became concerned about the new arrivals. Because of them, the first group may lose its positions. Time passed. They lacked a mage. But overall, the balance was good. The third group grew inexorably without a single loss. Anything's plan seemed to be going swimmingly. Gathered in the dining room, the 3 discussed how they would soon surpass the main group and also planned to take the mage for themselves. Peter suddenly entered unexpectedly, frightening Maxwell. He had no need to intervene in their conversation, so he simply went about his business, realizing that they had no concept of teamwork. Not without problems, their group broke through the 14th floor. As it turned out, 13 and 14 were easy, but 12 turned out to be really difficult, or they were just lucky. Peter reasoned that none of the third group had reached level 10, but the master would still send them on. Once they passed the 15th floor, his group would be synthesized. A dissatisfied Elizabeth expressed her opinion that while they were running in circles, the third group was catching up to them very quickly. The leader said that they just needed to wait a little while until their time came. He also asked the magician to demonstrate his new abilities, which the girl did with ease. The master does not develop at all in the lobby. There are good buildings, but they are overpopulated with heroes, and after all, new places for construction were opened after the 10th floor. It's time for him to start building level 3 buildings, but there's no sign that he's going to do that, as all his attention is focused on the third group. The new group members realized that the master favored them and began to show their true colors. So far, only petty grumbling at Chloe to serve more meat and stealing a sofa from the common area. After a while, a third group is summoned to the square again. This time they take 3 health potions with them. A disgruntled Joan is angry at the new kids who are taking away what others have worked hard to achieve. A lot of people gathered on the street to watch how the newcomers, who had become so annoying to everyone, would cope with the 15th floor. Maxwell, with an attack and a threat that when he returns he will give the heroes a good thrashing, entered the cut. The guys were worried about what would happen if the third group succeeded, to which Peter said that they would have to obey the master or everyone would die. The third group may and will pass the 15th floor. There are levels on which it would seem the group should definitely die, but the heroes successfully complete it. This also happens, however. In this case, the master will believe in himself, and the first group will be left behind. Apparently, they're doing okay, since the leader hasn't received a single system notification and they've been there for 5 minutes. Suddenly, a huge notification appears about the mission failure and the death of the entire group. Suddenly, everything started shaking, as if an earthquake had started. It turned out that the master left the game and, in a fit of anger, threw his phone. Izzy panicked and began pestering Peter with questions about what they should do now. The leader calmly said that the heroes were removed before the main action began. They didn't even earn any points for the floor. After that, the master did not log into the game for a long time. Izzy changed into pajamas and constantly whined to the boss about how they should be now, what to do now. But the guy diligently tried to ignore her. Because life goes on, they will continue to wake up, have breakfast, train, have lunch and train again, and then train even more until dinner. The other 1-stars were idle. They thought that now their hands were untied and there was nothing to fear, because there was no master, no synthesis, except for a couple of people. No one even went to the weekly dungeons. Unexpectedly, after 10 game days the master deigned to return. Izzy was happy. Some flash illuminated the entire settlement of heroes, after which the master immediately left the game. The fairy was stunned. The guardian panicked, and Peter noticed that the player clearly had a reason for taking the screenshot. The guy asked her about her hobbies. Izzy reminded him that she likes to surf the internet. Entering his room, the young man asked the fairy to go online. She said that it is not so easy to do this, because you need to put together all the elements of the impact that were left behind by the master. If he decides to just watch, the keeper's strength will last for an hour. But if Leo plans to write something, there will be much less time left. Having finally agreed, Izzy began the process of logging onto the internet for the sake of her beloved master Leo. The sorceress put all her strength into it and asked to finish her business quickly. A computer appeared in front of the leader. He went to the official Choose Me forum, to the help request section, where he found a message from Master Anything, who didn't know what had happened to his world. In the comments, many laughed at the guy for his actions. Some insulted him for his terrible play, but everyone was unanimous in their opinion. The guy needs to learn to play. Meanwhile, Izzy was already at her limit, and Leo had less and less time left. He decided to send Anything all the developments in Leo's game from his cloud, hoping that now he could change. In the comments to the post, he wrote from Leo's account that the guy should check his mail, after which comments poured in asking to help others instead of this fool. Leo clearly should have written anonymously. Izzy was at the end of her rope. As soon as the boss closed the site, the fairy fell onto the bed, exhausted. When he said that he had sent it to the master, the little one jumped up in delight and began to talk about how he had just shared with the guy the legendary Heavenly Book, which was considered an inaccessible treasure for players. Leo couldn't say that it contained all the information about the game, but it contained everything he had managed to write down. There was no certainty that the master would read it, since the volume of the notes was enough for several volumes of War and Peace, and it wasn't written for strangers' eyes. In any case, if he gets acquainted with it and can understand it, it will become very interesting. The next day, the master came in to Choose Me, and the first thing he gave Peter was a statue of a horse called Comrade in Arms. A pleased Leo told Izzy that before sending the letter, he slightly changed the end of the document to recommend giving the statue a couple of times to a hero he likes. Thanks to this, he realized that his master was not an irresponsible person, thus strengthening the connection between the hero and the player. If he really wants to climb to the very top of the tower, he must be at least as tall as Leo. Perhaps the master has not yet fully grasped the essence of his developments. But if he has the will, then Peter is ready to become his compass. After that, the first group became loyal, and the next day, Peter was already getting ready for battle, while simultaneously asking Izzy about the next opportunity to enter the internet. It turned out that everything depends on how quickly the interference points accumulate, which accumulate when the master is online and active. They accumulate faster when the level rises. Diamonds are also the physical embodiment of glasses, precious stones that contain the power of creation. Virtual currency is good, but if you deposit cash, the player is given a bonus of 1% of the amount. Peter came out to the team, who were already eagerly awaiting the battle. Charlie was worried about the lack of one hero in their group. The leader reassured him that Emma would join them for a while, and now the second group was also available for battle. The joyful heroes entered the rift, preparing to pass the 15th floor. However, they were moved to 8. The master clearly learned his lesson. At that very moment, goblin riders rushed at them. Elizabeth instantly began casting spells, starting with telekinesis. A multitude of monsters were immediately lifted up by an unknown force and swirled around in a whirlwind. Joan expertly fired 3 arrows at once, destroying 3 targets. After the mage began the fiery part of incinerating the creatures, now she casts in 10 seconds what used to take 40. The leader himself cut down each creature with quick movements. Emma looked at the team's well-coordinated work with dismay and did not understand why she was added to them. The guys successfully cleared the floor, although Emma has not yet adapted to the group, but she is smart and will soon find her place. Peter picked up the tired Elizabeth, who wanted to rest, and dragged her somewhere, saying that there was still a lot of work to do. The master received a notification that there is a hero capable of exploring. The leader and the magician found themselves in a magic hall. The young man said that the girl would have to do research. Izzy's unexpected appearance greatly frightened the aristocrat. She showed the magician where she would have to work and what exactly she would have to do. When the girl objected that she had already studied this earlier at the Magic Academy, the fairy shut her up by saying that this was the master's order, which she must carry out. Elizabeth had to complete tasks, which clearly did not please her very much. After a while, she was able to get a research unit. Her speed was 10 units per hour. 10 diamonds would be spent for each hour. Peter assumed that such a low speed would be characteristic of someone who had no skills in exploration. But when the master set the timer for the 3 hours a day that Elizabeth would spend on research, she began to be very indignant. Clever Peter asked Izzy to send a request to the master. The player received a notification that the young man wanted a fur coat, which he immediately purchased. Thus, the cunning leader gave the fur coat to the capricious magician and bribed her for further good work. Anything continued to make changes, sending heroes out on weekly dungeons, actively created weapons in the central workshop, formed a new group which included newly arrived heroes. The master had definitely changed, which made Leo incredibly happy. One day, Elizabeth asked Peter if he wanted to learn magic. After all, she could help him learn this, and besides, there were the necessary books in the hall. Peter thought about this offer and realized that if he got 3 stars, he would be able to choose a category, but in the current situation, he would become a warrior, and if he studied magic, he would become a swordsman mage. This class was not very strong, so the young man gave up studying. He decided to make fun of her and asked if Elizabeth had specifically wanted to train him so that he wouldn't have to decide everything alone, to which the girl's sharp reaction made it clear that this was exactly what was planned. Suddenly, the aristocrat decided to find out about Peter's life before he appeared here, because she did not believe that he was an ordinary farmer. But the guy tactfully asked the girl to focus on the tasks. Elizabeth herself was the daughter of a famous family, but all her relatives died during the war. Their silence was broken by a powerful flash above the heroes' heads. A notification has appeared about the increase in hero reaction due to research. After the announcement that the goddess had blessed the lobby, stars began to fall from the sky and head towards the heroes. One of them flew up to the magician and entered his chest. There are only 3 options in the research: research of hero reactions, dungeon depths, and lobby development. The master chose the first one for 30 points. Elizabeth suddenly felt sick and almost fell over. Peter advised her to say the phrase "statistics window," after which a sign appeared in front of the girl. He explained to the frightened aristocrat that in him she could see her skills in numbers. The third group died because they didn't really understand the essence of the mission. The heroes weren't aware of the conditions for clearing the floor, since they didn't see the system messages. Studying the heroes' reactions solves this problem. The leader headed towards the exit of the hall and called Elizabeth with him to tell the others about the new product. As they entered the square, they immediately saw Charlie rushing towards them, running away from a ghost in the form of a star. Peter instantly caught him and immobilized him so that the star could enter the hero. As soon as this happened, the blonde fell into ecstasy. Joan was standing nearby with the window already open. It turned out that she had overheard Peter muttering under his breath and simply repeated this phrase. In the evening, the team had a small meeting in the canteen to discuss their skills and level up. Elizabeth asked Peter how he knew about the phrase that opens the window, but the guy replied that he just stumbled upon it. Naturally, the leader aroused a lot of suspicion in the magician. When Joan praised the commander, Charlie admired her ability to deep lease. The girl proudly added that this was not ass-kissing, but a survival tactic. Peter promised himself that if these guys held out until the end, he would definitely tell them everything. The next day, the news of the stat window spread throughout the lobby. Most only saw part of it due to their low level, and some were unable to summon them at all. As usual, the heroes went to the training arena. Peter expertly deflected Joan's many arrows with his sword. She asked if reflecting everything was a skill, and it turned out that it was. She thought, if there is a reflective force, then there must also be a counteracting force. Her thoughts were quickly dispelled by a powerful attack from behind from the leader. Naturally, the agile Joan quickly dodged and attacked. The old training is no longer suitable for them. Now it's time to fight with real weapons. From that moment on, their training method consisted of beating the opponent until he was at death's door. The commander noticed Charlie and invited him to join, but the young man tactfully decided to refuse. Then Peter began to attack Joan furiously. His blow was stopped by a dagger that was a centimeter from his eye. He dodged sharply and threw the unexpected weapon away from himself. Joan continued her hellish attacks and gained the ability to identify a weak spot. Shocked by such rapid progress, he continued to deflect the endless stream of arrows. He asked when the girl managed to learn it. It turned out that she learned the skill out of strong desire, which greatly interested the leader. It simply wouldn't happen anymore. She was calculating how best to build an attack, make him dodge the first arrow, then aim for a weak spot with the second or third, or add a few fake shots. Peter's ability to dart around his finger with arrows made it much more difficult for him to dodge. A notification appeared about the increase in the basic bow skill, which made the boss doubt his victory. The guy knew he needed to learn something more advanced than target tracking, like identifying a target before firing an arrow. As soon as he got this idea, he immediately gained insight, thanks to which he gets closer to Joan. And after a few blows, the girl found herself prostrate on the ground. After training, the team analyzed their skills. Peter was able to gain new ones. Charlie had only 3. Joan began to list a long text about her skills. The leader tactfully stopped her, seeing the blonde's embarrassment, and said that the number of skills does not indicate strength, since everything depends on the relationship with your level. If a hero has an incompatible skill, it will do more harm than good. An example of this is the skills Berserk and Cold-Blooded. But this is a special case. But Joan had 9 skills. She is certainly the highest standard. The next day, the master decided to combine items to obtain an exaltation stone. The success rate was 87%. However, the attempt was unsuccessful and the items were destroyed. The failure, with such a great chance of success, unpleasantly surprised Peter. But on the next try, everything went smoothly and Joan got the stone to get her 2nd star. Leo's rise was unusual due to Terra's intervention. Joan must see something completely different from what he saw. After her successful ascension, Joan emerged depressed and had a dream in which the forest she lived in was on fire. The guy tried to calm the girl down a little, asking her to just remember about it and not to worry. It turns out that memory returns through elevation. Then all the heroes initially have amnesia. And at the 4th, 5th star, they realize the truth, how they were called here and what happened to the old world. A little later, Charlie also passed his 1st elevation. Peter had no idea what kind of dream the boy had, but his motivation had clearly increased. Charlie noticed that the leader was working much harder than the others and wanted to stay with him during training. But Peter advised him to rest, since such a load was normal for him, but not for the young man. As soon as the blonde left, the commander entered berserker mode and began destructive training. He knew he had become stronger, but he still couldn't concentrate his power where he wanted in this mode. If berserk was activated, the guy became stronger, but the effectiveness of the skills dropped and he lost his composure. If they could achieve synergy, they would have united long ago, for example, as the skill of wielding a sword and shield. Emma burst into his loneliness with an unexpected question. She did not believe that the young man was an ordinary farmer and asked if he had killed anyone. Peter calmly replied that he was here at the cost of the lives of other people, 3 of whom were synthesized with him. He added that everything that appears on the level is considered monsters, they just need to kill them. Emma was worried that his team might feel differently about the deaths of their enemies, but the leader assured her that he knew the heroes well, and there was nothing to worry about.